43 years ago, a petroleum engineer named Thomas Rayburn vanished on his way to a job site in Oklahoma, disappearing without a trace and leaving behind his wife, children, and an entire town in shock and terror. Authorities immediately suspected his closest colleague, Miguel Torres, who left town right after, might be involved, but with no body and no solid leads, the case quickly went cold and was forgotten. Yet for all those years, one young OSBI investigator never gave up. She kept every fragile piece of evidence, hoping one day the truth would come out. And then, while reviewing old files, she spotted one tiny detail that had been overlooked for decades. A detail that could turn the entire case upside down and shock the whole state of Oklahoma. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you love cold cases that finally get solved after years of silence, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. In 1982, Oklahoma was in the middle of the energy crisis. Plunging oil prices had forced many drilling companies to shut down or lay off workers. The small town of Edmond, on the northern edge of Oklahoma City, had always been a quiet little industrial area with rows of single-story homes, machine shops, and scattered pump jacks. But now it carried the heavy air of recession. Life here revolved around work shifts, the sound of drilling rigs, and quiet evenings broken only by the rumble of oil tankers on the highway. In that environment, 42-year-old Thomas Rayburn, technical engineer for Red Mesa Energy, was one of the lucky few who still had a steady job. He lived with his wife Linda and their 2 children in a red brick house on Bryant Avenue, a few miles from downtown. Neighbors described him as quiet, reserved, and regimented. He left for work at 6:30 a.m. sharp every day and was home in time for dinner. On the morning of July 16, 1982, Rayburn walked out in a light blue dress shirt and khakis, carrying his brown leather briefcase with work papers, and told Linda he was heading to the Southern Lease to check equipment. His silver Ford F-100 pickup rolled out of the driveway, turned toward the highway, and disappeared behind the row of oak trees. No one ever saw him again. By noon, Linda realized he hadn't shown up at the office, and no one was answering the company phone. She called his coworkers and the lease site. No one had seen him. By afternoon, worry turned to panic as her calls still went unanswered. That night, the yellow porch light glowed onto the empty street, while Linda sat at the kitchen table, staring at his empty chair for hours. Just after 9 p.m., she threw on a jacket, drove to the Edmond Police Department, and reported her husband missing. The case was officially logged at 9:45 p.m. that same day. The night shift that evening was commanded by Lieutenant Harold Mendez, a 17-year veteran known for being methodical and by the book. When Linda walked in, clutching a photo of Thomas in his work clothes, Mendez knew this wasn't a routine missing person report. He sat her down, pulled out the report pad, turned on the desk lamp, and started writing. Linda recounted the day's events, her voice breaking several times. Thomas left at 6:30 a.m. in the silver Ford F-100, said he was going to the Southern Lease, and was expected back by late afternoon. He never made it to the office. The company phone rang with no answer. She had called coworkers, friends, even the gas station near the house. No one had seen him. Mendez asked her to describe his appearance, clothing, and everything he had with him. Then probed about his health, mood, or any unusual behavior. Linda said he was perfectly healthy, just tired from work and a long-running audit at Red Mesa Energy. When she mentioned the company, Mendez paused his pen and asked for details. Linda explained Red Mesa was struggling because of low oil prices. Some people had been laid off, and Thomas was working long hours to finish technical reports. Mendez jotted, "Job, financial pressure, verify." After almost 40 minutes, he signed the official report, closed the folder, and signaled the desk officer to open the internal channel. He ordered every night patrol unit in the Edmond and Arcadia area to check the route from the Rayburn house to the Red Mesa Lease, Route 66, the Arcadia Back Road, and County Road 5, looking for a silver Ford F-100, license plate 37EK241, driven by a middle-aged man in a light blue shirt. On the wall map in the command room, he drew the likely route in red marker, circled possible stops: the Texaco station, the Route 66 diner, the industrial turnoff intersection, and dispatched two two-man teams, one heading each direction, rolling out at 10 p.m. sharp. While the officers geared up, Mendez reviewed Rayburn's personal file: chief engineer at Red Mesa Energy, 16 years experience, work address, direct supervisor's name. He added a reminder in his notebook: check internal relationships, contact Red Mesa. In records, the desk officer entered the missing person case into the system under code MP802045. Copies of the report and victim photo were forwarded to the Regional Investigations Unit. Back in the command office, Mendez sat at his desk, looking out at the parking lot as the patrol cars pulled out. He reviewed the task list one last time. Time he left home, vehicle, route, mental state, occupation, social ties, everything normal, except one thing: the Red Mesa Energy audit. From experience, Mendez knew financial trouble at a company often spilled over into personal problems. He underlined that note heavily and wrote a final line: verify actual route, coordinate with Tulsa Bank. The floodlight outside cast long beams across the wet asphalt. Night wind rattled the oaks and carried the familiar smell of oil dust. When the two patrol cars left the gate, Mendez went back to his desk, picked up the duty phone, and ordered the first situation report within 60 minutes. That was how the official investigation into the disappearance of engineer Thomas Rayburn began. With a thin folder, a few pages of notes, and a 12-mile stretch of road swallowed by darkness. At 11:40 p.m., Patrol Unit 3, officers Joe Latham and Rick Sawyer, left downtown Edmond, heading south toward Arcadia along the route Chipanit Mendez had marked. It was a clear, dark night. The pavement still glistened with leftover afternoon rain. They scanned every stretch, flashing lights into the grass shoulders and tree lines. Just before midnight, as they turned onto County Road 5, a narrow, rarely used spur 3 miles from the nearest houses, Latham spotted a metallic glint ahead in the headlights. They slowed, aimed the spotlight, and saw a silver Ford F-100 pickup, matching the description from the All Points Bulletin, issued hours earlier. It was parked crooked on the right shoulder, nose pointed toward the sparse woods, lights off, doors closed, no visible collision damage. Latham stopped 20 yards back and radioed the find to headquarters. Mendez came back immediately: secure the scene, wait for forensics, and do not touch the vehicle. While waiting, Sawyer swept the pickup with his flashlight and confirmed the plate 37EK241. There were a few wet mud streaks on the side panels, the left front tire slightly sunk into the soft shoulder, and clear rear tire tracks in the damp dirt, pointing straight, no skid marks. The windshield had a thin layer of dust, but no fresh wipe marks. Grass around the truck was pushed down on both sides, suggesting it had been there several hours. Sawyer aimed his light to the right and spotted faint footprints in the soft ground leading toward the tree line. He crouched and measured 29 centimeters long, smooth sole, no deep tread, possibly dress shoes. The prints ran about 8 meters, then vanished at the brush. Night breeze was already drying the soil, making them harder to see. Latham grabbed the camera from the trunk and shot the vehicle from all 4 angles, then close-ups of the tire tracks and footprints. In the open bed they saw only basic tools: wrenches, pliers, oily gloves, neatly arranged, no sign of rummaging. Through the side window, brown leather briefcase, still buckled on the passenger seat. Empty paper coffee cup beside it. No scattered papers, no gasoline smell, no burning odor. The cab was cold. Truck had been sitting a long time. Latham logged every observation. GPS coordinates, vehicle orientation, weather, condition, visible traces. Sawyer measured the distance from the truck to the tree line, 6.8 meters. When the forensics team arrived, They set up portable floodlights and strung tape in a 15-meter radius. A small sign reading, "Scene secured." Edmond PD was planted by the road. Technicians took soil samples near the rear tires at 3 depths for possible oil or chemical residue, bag CR5A/82. Photographed everything with scale rulers, then cleared the scene. Mendez arrived with backup, walked the perimeter, studied the mud streaks and faint shoe prints, and crouched by the driver's door. No drag marks, no scuffs, nothing dropped. His quick assessment: vehicle stopped intentionally, not abandoned. He wrote that on the report margin. He then ordered the truck towed to the police impound for full interior processing. Before leaving, he had one last panoramic photo taken that included the forest turnoff. His watch read 2:17 a.m. Wind from the fields rattled the tape. The floodlights reflected faintly off the silver Ford like a ghost in the night. The entire scene was marked, sealed, and officially handed over to Edmond PD Forensics, with the preliminary report filed in the early hours of July 17, 1982. After Thomas Rayburn's Ford F-100 was towed to the impound, Lieutenant Harold Mendez returned to the scene to launch an expanded search. Dawn fog still hung in the air, temperature low, ground cold and damp. A light south wind carrying the smell of oil and wet grass. He set up a temporary field command post on County Road 5, about 200 meters from where the truck was found, using a patrol car as the radio hub. The plan had 3 prongs: ground search within a 5-mile radius, sweep of the sparse northern woods and the low southwestern hills, and low-altitude helicopter overflight. Personnel totaled 14 officers, 4 local rescue volunteers, 2 K-9 teams from Payne County, and a state police support unit. Mendez put Sergeant Joe Latham in charge of the eastern sector near dense Arcadia Lake woods, while he and the forensics team took the open flats with the tire tracks. At the staging area, every team received radios, flashlights, maps, compasses, and evidence flags. At 6:15 a.m., the radio order went out: search commence, check in every 30 minutes. The 2 German Shepherds, Duke and Arrow, were released near the footprint site. They picked up scent along the shoulder, followed the grass strip, then veered north, down a gentle slope toward a dry creek bed. In the early light, the wet mud glistened and revealed a few more faint shoe prints that forensics quickly photographed. Dry Creek was bone dry in summer, just scattered puddles among jagged rocks. Teams walked both banks, checking every trunk and bush. The only item of note was a scrap of blue fabric caught on a low branch. Latham marked it, bagged it, and moved on. 2 miles southwest, Sergeant Collins' team found fresh light truck tire marks that did not match the Ford. Those were flagged for later checking. Overhead, the state police helicopter flew low grids with infrared, but reported no heat signatures or unusual objects at 8:20 a.m. Mendez called everyone back to command at 9 a.m. to review the map. He expanded the northern circle 2 more miles because of easy terrain and highlighted the old Red Mesa drilling pad area with its trails deep into the woods. Team 4 was tasked with compass and binocular survey of any fresh dirt piles or disturbed grass. All morning teams grid searched, planting numbered wooden stakes in every cleared section. By noon the temperature had climbed, fog burned off, and the smell of hot oil rose from the ground, making the work grueling. The dogs gradually lost the scent and circled back to the starting point. Mendez paused for an overview. Empty road, almost no traffic, thick oaks hiding whatever lay beyond. He wrote, "No signs of violence, no body, no direct evidence." At 1 p.m., everyone regrouped for debrief. The map on the vehicle hood was color-coded, searched green and recheck yellow zones. 2 locations were circled, the creek bank with the fabric and the hill with new tire marks. Mendez suspended the search to collect soil and photos at those spots and radioed Edmond PD headquarters, 5-mile radius complete. No body, no clear conflict indicators, 2 sites to re-examine today. By 2 p.m., technicians packed gear, folded the tent, and transported all samples to the county lab. Stakes and fluttering yellow tape remained along the roadside. Mendez was the last to leave command, took one final look around, and closed his notebook with the final entry. County Road 5 area, 5-mile radius, no trace of missing person. That same afternoon, after the search team withdrew from the County Road 5 area, Lieutenant Harold Mendez returned to Edmond to conduct the next follow-up inspection at Thomas Rayburn's residence. The red brick house stood on quiet Bryant Avenue, roughly 3 miles from downtown, in a neighborhood mostly occupied by technical workers' families, with neatly mowed front lawns and old white fences whose paint had faded. Linda Rayburn was waiting on the porch when the police car pulled up, her eyes ringed with dark circles from lack of sleep. Mendez presented the search warrant, briefly explained the procedure, and asked her to temporarily leave the premises while the forensics team worked. 3 officers and 2 crime scene technicians entered the house at 15:20 hours, starting in the living room, videotaping the entire layout for the record. Everything was orderly, with no signs of ransacking. The sofa was tidy, family photos sat on the shelf, books and magazines were neatly stacked. On the dining table was an unwashed coffee mug, white ceramic with the Red Mesa Energy logo. Rayburn's office was at the end of the hallway, door slightly ajar, desk holding a drilling site blueprint, several thick plastic-bound files, an older personal computer, and drawers full of technical documents. The photographer took pictures of every angle, logging evidence numbers VR01 through VR07. A work notebook lay next to the landline telephone. The last entry, dated July 15th, read Site Check, Southfield. There were no signs of hurried writing or erasures. Inside the filing cabinet, Mendez found 2 envelopes containing First National Bank Tulsa statements, several prior month account summaries, and an internal audit notice from Red Mesa Energy. All were sealed into separate evidence bags. In the bedroom, everything remained undisturbed. Clothes folded, bed made, an old suitcase stored unopened under the bed. The kitchen was clean. The trash can contained only fast food wrappers and no handwritten notes or signs of preparation to leave. Around 16 o'clock, the forensics team moved to the detached garage at the rear of the property, a brick structure with a half-open metal roll-up door. Late afternoon light fell across the oil-stained and dusty concrete floor. As soon as he stepped inside, Mendez noticed the distinctive heavy smell of old oil coming from the right corner where 2 fuel cans stood. He signaled the technician to switch on the portable light and slowly sweep the floor. On the concrete appeared an irregular dark stain, approximately 60 centimeters long, roughly oval, dull brown in color, and slightly tacky to the touch. Next to it was a rolled-up mechanic's rag, the upper half soaked with the same type of mark. The technician took swab samples, sealed them in a plastic bag labeled GR02. A comparative soil dust sample adjacent to the stain was also collected. The rest of the garage contained a workbench, shelves of lubricants, wrenches and bolts, everything arranged in rows with no evidence of hurried use. In the left corner, a small wooden cabinet held mechanical drawings. Faint fingerprints were visible on the top and were photographed. Near the entrance, Officer Latham discovered an older shoe print in the dust, smooth-soled leather shoe, approximately 29 centimeters, matching the size of the print previously found at the vehicle scene. That print was photographed and dusted separately, labeled GR05. Mendez recorded everything in his notebook: garage, oil puddle, dark stain, shoe print, mechanical tools, scene clean, no disarray. He also had the outdoor industrial trash bin checked. It contained only scrap paper, paint cans, and empty oil containers. No discarded personal items. All evidence was packaged, sealed, labeled according to regulation, and transported to the Payne County lab. Before leaving, Mendez walked once more around the house and looked through the office window. The desk was still lit, papers lying exactly as if the owner had only stepped out for a moment. His final note on the search report read, "Residence tidy, no signs of struggle or voluntary departure. Garage contains unusual oil stain and unidentified dark mark. Samples collected. At 17:10 hours, the team left the scene, locked and sealed the front door with Edmond PD police tape, and the preliminary report was completed in the vehicle on the way back to headquarters with the brief conclusion: no items reported missing, additional forensic examination required. On the morning of July 18, 1982, after completing the report on the search of Thomas Rayburn's residence, Lieutenant Harold Mendez began the phase of gathering information on persons connected to the case. At Edmond PD headquarters, he and 2 assisting officers compiled a list of individuals who had direct or regular contact with the victim in the 2 weeks prior to his disappearance. 3 initial groups were identified: family, co-workers at Red Mesa Energy, and the household employee, personal driver Miguel Torres. Investigation forms ID-01 through ID-03 were created, recording name, address, last contact time, and relationship description. Linda Rayburn was asked to come to headquarters at 9:15 for additional statements. She sat across from Mendez in the small interview room, looking exhausted with swollen red eyes after another sleepless night. He asked for more detail about her husband's daily habits, schedule, work routine, recent calls, and who typically contacted him outside office hours. Linda stated that Thomas always left the house at exactly 6:30 a.m., drove himself, sometimes stopped at the Texaco station near the highway for coffee, then continued to the Red Mesa field. He had little social life and was close only to Chief Engineer Vernon Hale and Project Assistant Alan Brooks. Mendez requested their contact numbers and revisited the last calls on the home landline. Linda said there were no outgoing calls on the 16th, but around 21 o'clock the previous night, there had been a short call during which she heard Thomas say, "I'll bring it tomorrow," before hanging up. She did not know who was on the other end. This detail was underlined in the report. After finishing with her, Mendez moved to the second group, Red Mesa Energy co-workers. He and Officer Latham drove to the company headquarters on the southern outskirts of Edmond at noon and met Technical Director Vernon Hale, who confirmed Thomas Rayburn had not appeared at the field since the morning of the 16th. Hale said Rayburn had been scheduled to inspect the pumping system at South Field, but never arrived. Colleagues confirmed no one had received any call or message from him. Rayburn's assistant, Alan Brooks, stated that on the afternoon of the 15th, Rayburn left the office early carrying a financial folder, saying he needed to review the numbers before the bank meeting. That exact quote was recorded verbatim in the report. Mendez requested the employee list and gate logs for the field on the 16th for timeline comparison. Cross-checking showed no one reported seeing Rayburn's vehicle in the Red Mesa area. Back at headquarters, he moved to the third group, Miguel Torres, the family's driver of nearly 7 years. The interview took place at 17 o'clock in an interrogation room. Miguel, a Mexican man around 30 years old, short, wore a silver ring, was cooperative but guarded. When asked the last time he saw Rayburn, he said the evening of the 15th he stopped by the house to pick up the spare truck key. Thomas was standing at the garage door and told him, "No need to come tomorrow, I have personal business." Miguel added that for the past 3 weeks the boss had seemed tense, often smoking in the garage and receiving unusual late-night calls. When Mendez asked if he overheard any content, Miguel shook his head no. He said on the morning of the 16th he stayed home doing yard work and only heard at noon that the boss had not shown up at work. All details were recorded and signed. Mendez paused the interview and requested Miguel surrender the spare key to the Ford F-100 and the recent maintenance records. When compiling all statements for the day, he began cross-referencing timelines. Linda confirmed Thomas left at 6:30 a.m. Miguel claimed he had spoken to him in the garage the night before. Alan Brooks said Rayburn took financial documents for a bank meeting on the 16th. Mendez noted the coincidence between the overheard phone call on the 15th, "I'll bring it tomorrow," and Brooks' statement about the bank meeting. However, an inconsistency appeared in Miguel's statement. He claimed he was told not to drive on the 16th, despite the fixed schedule showing he always chauffeured Rayburn on weekdays. Mendez circled that line, marked it in red, and wrote timeline contradiction, requires verification. When prioritizing, he placed Miguel Torres in Category A suspect because he was the last person to see the victim and had direct access to the missing vehicle. Linda Rayburn and the two co-workers were classified as primary witnesses. The day's report was 12 pages long, including a consolidated timeline from July 15, 17 covering calls, routes, work hours, and recorded events. Mendez signed at the bottom with the note, "Statement contradictions, priority suspicion Miguel Torres." When he set down his pen, the clock read 1940. The office was lit only by the desk lamp shining on the thick case file. On the morning of July 19, 1982, after finalizing the summary of statements and related persons list, Lieutenant Harold Mendez directed the expansion of the search for Thomas Rayburn beyond the County Road 5 zone. Based on topographic maps and patrol reports, he prioritized two directions: Arcadia Lake, more than 4 miles east of the vehicle site, and the downstream section of the Cimarron River, running through fields to the southwest. Both areas featured complex terrain alternating between hills and wetlands, ideal for concealing objects or traces. At 7 o'clock at the field command post, Mendez held a quick briefing with the rescue team leader and 2 Oklahoma Highway Patrol units. He outlined the plan: 3 teams. Team 1 would survey Arcadia Lake using boats and basic sonar. Team 2 would follow the Cimarron River checking sandbars. Team 3 would return to Dry Creek, where the shoe print and cloth fragment had previously been found. Total personnel, 22, including divers, technicians, 3 K-9 units, and 1 aerial helicopter. As the sun rose above the oak trees, all teams deployed simultaneously. The Arcadia Lake team approached the south shore, where the water was deep and filled with fallen branches. They sent 2 divers down in the suspected zone, searching the muddy bottom within a 50-meter radius of the anchor point. Visibility was nearly zero in the thick silt. Divers followed guide ropes and used lights to look for metal objects or fabric. After more than an hour, they recovered only rotted wood pieces and a rusted can. Nothing relevant. On the north shore, another group patrolled the sand, noting old tire tracks and a few newer heavy truck marks that did not match the Ford F-100. At 9 o'clock, the helicopter reported observing a section of riverbank along the Cimarron that appeared freshly eroded, with different colored soil. The ground team measured and determined it was natural washout from recent rain, not a man-made hole. Mendez marked the spot on the map and ordered panoramic photos. By 10:30, the team returned to Dry Creek, a low area with a shallow bed and thick grass on both banks. 2 handlers walked the K-9 Sayhead along the mud. A west wind carried the scent of wet earth and a faint trace of oil. 1 dog, Duke, stopped near a narrow section of the creek, barked repeatedly, and pulled toward dense brush on the bank. Mendez approached, shone his flashlight into the roots, and spotted a piece of blue fabric caught on a low branch, torn at the edge with thread still caked in mud. He ordered the scene frozen, then put on rubber gloves and carefully removed the cloth with tweezers into an evidence bag. The fabric was coarse, small check pattern, color matching the shirt Linda described her husband wearing when he left home. Under light, the torn area showed irregular dark dried staining. Mendez noted, blue fabric fragment, 12 gauge 8 centimeters, recovered Dry Creek, possible match to victim's shirt. Technicians photographed the overall scene in close-ups before bagging. They also collected 2 mud samples and 1 grass sample for comparison. No drag marks from a heavy object or fresh tire tracks were present. At 11 o'clock, the items were transported to the command post, sealed as DC-03, and a transfer report prepared. En route back, Mendez stopped on the West Hill to survey the vast landscape stretching to the horizon. Old cornfields mixed with oak groves and narrow trails like cracks in the earth where a person could vanish without a trace. At the post, he phoned the Payne County lab, requesting the forensic unit receive the samples for fiber, chemical, and possible DNA analysis. The report was written on site, samples dispatched at 12:15. The lake and river teams reported negative results, submitting only photos and water samples for reference. By early afternoon, All personnel returned to the command area for data consolidation. Mendez spread the map on a vehicle hood, drew lines connecting search points, forming an arc around the Ford Discovery site, marked Dry Creek in red, with the note, "Suspicious evidence, origin to be confirmed." After completing the report, he signed it, forwarded copies to Edmond PD Criminalistics, and retained the original. In the afternoon, the wind shifted, bringing dry heat and dust that covered the remaining tire tracks. Mendez closed his notebook and gazed toward the distant tree line where the Dry Creek ran silently cut through gray mud. One small detail, a torn scrap of cloth among thousands of acres of empty land, but enough to leave him with a lingering sense that something crucial remained unseen. At 1350 the teams disbanded, samples were en route, and Dry Creek was marked with signs and added to the list. Suspicious area, priority re-examination. On July 20, 1982, after completing the report on the expanded search around Arcadia Lake and Dry Creek, Lieutenant Harold Mendez shifted the investigation focus to the financial angle, based on entries in Thomas Rayburn's notebook and details about Red Mesa Energy, previously provided by Linda. He noted that evidence collected from the residence included numerous accounting documents, bank correspondence, and an internal audit notice. That morning, he and Officer Latham returned to Red Mesa Energy headquarters on the southern edge of Edmond, a two-story brown brick building in a quiet industrial zone that had once been the operational hub for dozens of engineers and workers before recent layoffs began. Technical Director Vernon Hale received them in the first-floor conference room and provided Rayburn's personnel file and documents related to the Southfield project, his final assignment. Mendez requested all financial reports for the past 3 months, particularly any off-books payments or transactions approved by Rayburn's signature. The accounting department turned over 6 paper folders, mostly copies of transfer invoices between the company and suppliers. While reviewing, Latham discovered an entry dated July 13 for a $150,000 transfer from the company account at First National Bank Tulsa to a personal account in the name of Miguel Torres. The adjacent note read only equipment relocation, with no contract code or second approver. Mendez asked the chief accountant for an explanation. The accountant said he had never been notified of this transaction and had only seen the confirmation fax to the office 2 days before Rayburn disappeared. The fax had been sent from the technical department machine and bore the signature T. Rayburn in straight, slightly right-slanting handwriting. Recognizing the irregularity, Mendez immediately ordered all related documents copied and the originals sealed. He requested bank records to verify timing and initiator. By noon, back at Edmond PD, he telephoned the First National Bank Security Division in Tulsa. Bank personnel confirmed the $150,000 transfer from Red Mesa Energy occurred at 1542 on July 13. 3 days before the disappearance, authorized under Thomas Rayburn's name via electronic certificate at the main branch counter. However, branch security footage from that time showed no one matching Rayburn's description. Instead, a short man in a brown jacket and baseball cap used different ID to complete the transaction. Regarding the recipient, the account in Miguel Torres's name had been opened at the same bank system in February 1982, listed occupation contractor, Red Mesa Energy. Nearly the entire amount, $148,000, was withdrawn in cash over the next 2 days in 3 successive transactions. The bank's preliminary report was faxed to Edmond PD that afternoon, with copies of transaction records and screen captures. Mendez spread the documents on his desk, highlighting in red the date July 13 and recipient Miguel Torres. He recalled Linda's statement about the brief phone call on the evening of the 15th, when Rayburn said, "I'll bring it tomorrow," and immediately connected the pieces, the scheduled bank meeting, pre-audit tension, and the personal driver receiving a large company payment. In his internal memo to the investigation's captain, he wrote, "Suspicious transfer of $150,000 from Red Mesa Energy to personal account of Miguel Torres, no legitimate approval, suspected embezzlement." Mendez directed Latham to open new financial case file FM 8211 for federal coordination. That afternoon, He contacted the FBI Tulsa field office, provided a verbal briefing, and secure faxed copies. Special Agent Stephen Garfinkel, handling financial fraud, confirmed agents would arrive in Edmond within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Mendez had clerical staff send formal requests to First National Bank Tulsa to freeze Miguel Torres's account pending source of funds review and to provide 6 months of transaction history. Late afternoon, the detailed statement arrived by fax showing the account previously had minimal activity, only monthly $1,200 payroll deposits from Red Mesa Energy, until the $150,000 credit, followed by 3 cash withdrawals, leaving it empty. Mendez requested handwriting analysis of the Rayburn signature on the authorization against known samples from the residence and company files. Comparing side by side under magnification, he noted the faxed signature was stiffer, more slanted, with narrower letter spacing and a connected R, unlike the authentic signature's clear hooks and even spacing. Preliminary assessment, high probability of forgery. He noted, signature mismatch, forward for formal handwriting examination. In his office, compiling everything, Mendez drew a simple money flow diagram: Red Mesa Energy Miguel Torres account cash withdrawal, Rayburn disappearance. Red arrows connected the 4-day sequence. The sheet was clipped to the front of the case file next to the evidence report. Before leaving, he drafted urgent reports to Oklahoma Highway Patrol and FBI Tulsa titled, Suspicious Corporate Transaction, Possible Embezzlement Related to Missing Person Case Thomas Rayburn. The office lights remained on until nearly 21 o'clock as he typed the final summary line, irregular $150,000 transaction identified, recipient Miguel Torres, dated July 13, 1982. Requires coordinated federal investigation. The fax was transmitted at 21:17, marking the moment the investigation expanded from local to federal jurisdiction, triggered by one large transfer and a name that now appeared repeatedly across the growing case file, Miguel A. Torres. On July 21, 1982, immediately after submitting the financial report to the FBI Tulsa office, Lieutenant Harold Mendez turned his attention back to examining the physical evidence collected from Thomas Rayburn's garage. The oil stain and dark smear samples had been sent to the Payne County lab 3 days earlier, and that morning, preliminary analysis results were returned to Edmond PD. Inside the sealed envelope was a 3-page report signed by forensic chemist Daniel Coates, confirming that the oil sample labeled JR02 had a hydrocarbon composition matching the type of industrial drilling oil used at Red Mesa Energy's fields. However, to ensure accuracy, Coates recommended cross-referencing it with an original sample from the company's storage tanks. Mendez immediately called Vernon Hale, Red Mesa's technical director, and requested samples of crude oil extracted from the South Field tank, the same type Rayburn had referenced in recent technical reports. By noon, a lab courier delivered 3 glass vials containing raw oil labeled RMESF1, RMESF2, and RMESF3, properly sealed. All samples were submitted for comparison analysis that same afternoon. Results were recorded at 3:10 p.m. The garage sample JR02 was identical to RMESF2 in viscosity, sulfur content, and solid residue ratio. Specifically, the heavy hydrocarbon ratio was 82.4%, matching the Red Mesa sample to 3 decimal places, while the other 2 samples showed greater variance due to different production batches. Coates' preliminary conclusion in the report read, high probability that the oil originates from the same production batch as oil extracted at Red Mesa Energy, South Field. Mendez reread every line, underlined the phrase same production batch, and wrote in his notebook, material match confirmed, timing of contamination undetermined. He understood that chemical matching alone was insufficient to establish criminal conduct. The oil could have ended up in the garage legally, especially since Rayburn often brought work home. However, he paid particular attention to the dark smear on the rag labeled JR03. After component separation, this sample revealed drilling oil mixed with a small amount of oxidized organic matter, dark brown in color, of unknown origin. Coates noted, insufficient data for identification, possibly a mixture of oil, organic dust, or animal residue. Mendez requested the sample be retained for additional spectroscopic analysis once equipment was transferred from Oklahoma City. Beyond the oil, 2 soil samples taken from beneath the garage floor, JR04 and JR05, were compared with soil from Dry Creek. Results showed the same clay-heavy soil characteristic of eastern Edmond, but differing in moisture content and sediment color, proving they were not from the same location. He noted this detail to rule out the hypothesis that the body had ever been brought into the garage. That afternoon, Mendez went to the lab in person to observe the process again. Coates walked him through each step. The oil was heated, filtered, separated into components, and compared via spectroscopy. The graphs on the screen showed 2 lines almost perfectly overlapping, a clear sign of duplication. Staring at the bright spectral bands, Mendez thought about the connection between the oil stain in the garage, Rayburn's job, and the $150,000 transferred to Miguel Torres. Everything seemed to link together into a chain of events, yet he was still missing a crucial link: the true relationship between the 2 men, and the reason company money had ended up with the driver. In the internal memo drafted that day, Mendez wrote clearly, "Oil stain analysis matches Red Mesa Energy sample, insufficient for criminal charges, recommend retaining records, and continued monitoring." At 5 p.m., he received a call from Hale, confirming that in the week before his disappearance, Rayburn had taken home a can of sample oil from the field to test settling rates, a fact that could explain the presence of oil in the garage. However, Hale also admitted Rayburn never reported the test results, and the can was no longer in company inventory. This information was added to the evidence appendix. Back at Edmond PD headquarters, Mendez briefed the chief investigator, emphasizing 2 points. First, the oil matched Red Mesa Energy. Second, the dark smear contained unidentified organic components. The chief ordered the samples preserved and awaited biological analysis results before drawing conclusions. Mendez returned to his desk, spread out maps and reports, and arranged them in order: recovered vehicle, garage scene, Red Mesa finances, oil evidence. He felt everything was gradually taking shape, yet still just out of reach. In his end-of-day report, he wrote the final line: evidence comparison complete, oil matches Red Mesa Energy source. Highly likely due to occupational activity, insufficient criminal grounds, continue monitoring additional forensic results. As he signed his name, night had fallen outside. The yellow lights from the distant industrial park reflected off the wet asphalt like streaks of spilled oil, slowly dissolving into the darkness, leaving in his mind a blurred image of an unresolved chain of events. By late August 1982, nearly 6 weeks after Thomas Rayburn vanished, the entire investigation had effectively reached a standstill. The supplemental forensic report from Payne County confirmed no biological traces in the garage dark smear, only drilling oil mixed with organic dust. Soil and fabric analysis from Dry Creek also yielded no definitive conclusions. DNA could not be extracted due to technological limitations at the time, and physical characteristics only indicated mass-produced domestic fabric. After compiling all data, Lieutenant Harold Mendez submitted the file to Edmond PD Investigations with the note, "No body recovered, no direct evidence of criminal activity." He recommended temporarily suspending field operations to avoid wasting manpower while maintaining surveillance of Red Mesa Energy's finances and Miguel Torres personally. However, by mid-September, the residency office reported that Miguel had left Oklahoma and moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, without providing a return date. Phone contact was impossible, and mailed letters were returned as undeliverable. Mendez requested federal verification, but since Miguel was not an official suspect, only a witness in a missing person case, an alert was denied. Meanwhile, Red Mesa Energy scaled back operations, laid off nearly half its staff, and most internal records were transferred to the parent company's archive in Houston. Rayburn's former colleagues, including Vernon Hale and Alan Brooks, had moved on, and no one retained original documents. Linda Rayburn, after numerous visits to the police station, began accepting that her husband was likely dead. She filed a life insurance claim and declared him missing, presumed deceased, under Oklahoma civil regulations. On October 10, 1982, Mendez received orders from above to suspend the case and reclassify the file as inactive, missing person. That night, in his office, he reread every folder from search logs and evidence reports to bank statements and crime scene photos. Every detail was carefully numbered, yet the final piece was missing: the victim's body. Under the legal system at the time, no body meant no prosecution, and no criminal evidence meant no grounds to hold anyone suspect. Mendez signed the bottom line: case suspended pending new evidence. A red stamp was applied to the cover: MP 82045, presumed deceased. All physical evidence was sealed and moved to Edmond PD long-term storage, including the oil, soil, fabric fragments, and Red Mesa financial records. That night, he stood at the window, overlooking the empty parking lot, streetlights illuminating dust in the air. After months of pursuit, everything had come full circle. A man left for work one morning and vanished without a trace. Mendez wrote the final entry in his personal notebook: no body, no new leads, no viable suspects. File temporarily closed, pending evidence for reactivation. The next morning, copies of the report were sent to Oklahoma State Police and the local court administrative office for civil archiving. On the last page of the file, a black ink stamp clearly read October 12, 1982, marking the moment Thomas Rayburn's disappearance officially entered a state of silence. Recorded in the system only as the brief line, presumed deceased, no further leads. In March 2008, more than 25 years after file, MP 82045 was closed. The Payne County Sheriff's Office launched a digitization program for backlogged cases to migrate data to Oklahoma's new electronic state archive. Funded by the Department of Justice, the project required reviewing all unsolved or suspended cases from 1970 to 1990. Hundreds of files. Rebecca Sloan, a civilian investigator recently transferred from administration, was assigned to the missing persons team. Her job was to inspect, catalog, cross-check status, and convert recoverable documents to digital format. On the morning of March 18th, while checking old storage cabinets in the basement of the Payne County Sheriff's Office, Rebecca discovered a dusty metal box sealed with a label reading Edmond PD evidence, MP 82045, presumed deceased. Below the text were Lieutenant Harold Mendez's signature and the 1982 closing date. A side label read Transfer 1985, Long-Term Archive. Curiosity led her to check the storage log. The case had never been digitized and carried no destroy notation. Rebecca reported to her supervisor and received permission to break the seal for condition assessment. With an archive technician, she cut the tape and opened the lid. Inside, evidence bags were neatly arranged, each still bearing original codes and signatures: GR02 garage oil, GR03 rag with dark smear, DC03 dry creek fabric, plus bags of soil and grass. A cloth-tied paper file contained the full 1982 investigation records, scene photos, and old lab reports. Everything remained in good condition, free of mold. Checking the log, Rebecca realized the case had never undergone DNA testing. Technology was not widely applied at the time. From years working cold cases, she knew that even tiny biological samples, if properly sealed, could still yield DNA. In her internal memo she wrote, "File MP 82045, evidence intact, no prior DNA testing, recommend transfer to OSBI for viability assessment." After approval, that afternoon, Rebecca prepared a transfer manifest. The bags were repackaged in a new box, sealed to current standards, and assigned electronic tracking code PCS008-112. She personally drove the evidence 60 miles to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation lab in Oklahoma City. At intake, the forensic technician verified the inventory, signed receipt, and said they would conduct initial screening to determine which samples remained viable for DNA extraction. Rebecca attached a case summary, including victim description, disappearance circumstances, vehicle recovery location, and evidence list. Returning to Payne County that evening, she added a note to her log, Rayburn file, submitted to OSBI for DNA. Status, awaiting results. On her small desk, the computer screen listed hundreds of other missing persons cases, but MP 82045 was flagged red and marked priority. That night, after the lights dimmed, Rebecca stayed to review the old photos of the Ford F-100 on County Road 5 and the first page of Mendez's 1982 report, with its familiar line, "Case suspended pending new evidence." She closed the folder and sighed. Nearly 3 decades later, a forgotten disappearance had landed on her desk, simply because of an administrative digitization project. But Rebecca knew that sometimes the smallest details opened entirely new doors. She returned the box to the shelf, labeled it OSBI pending, and signed the transfer date, strictly by the book. Everything happened quietly, without flashing lights or sirens, just an old file opened in a dark basement, quietly restarting the Thomas Rayburn case after 26 years of silence. On the morning of June 12, 2008, just 3 months after Rebecca Sloan submitted MP 82045 to OSBI for testing, an unexpected discovery occurred east of Edmond, little more than a mile from the original 1982 County Road 5 site. Land formerly used as a Red Mesa energy storage yard was being cleared for the new Meadow Ridge housing development. At approximately 8:40 a.m., while excavating the foundation for house number 17, the bucket struck something hard that rang like metal. The operator stopped, climbed down, and saw the edge of a gray 55-gallon drum protruding from heavy clay, its surface rusted and smelling of drilling oil. The site foreman halted work, suspecting leftover industrial chemical storage, and called Edmond Police per environmental regulations. Patrol units arrived at 9:15, cordoned the area, and restricted access. As officers began hand-digging around the drum to check depth, the soil collapsed, exposing the barrel's side stamped with faded letters. RME Supply Co., Red Mesa Energy Supply. The on-scene lieutenant stopped all mechanical work and requested the Payne County forensic team. By 10:20, the mobile crime scene unit arrived, set up a tent, and began controlled excavation. When the lid was pried open, a strong smell of oil mixed with decomposed organic matter escaped. Inside, thick sludge covered an almost complete human skeleton wrapped in heavy oil-soaked fabric. Next to the right arm bones, technicians found an old wristwatch with a round steel face and rotted leather band. The back was engraved, TR. Other items in the drum included a bent silver ring, fabric scraps, and an old electrical cord looped around the neck area. Everything was photographed in place, labeled MR01 through MR06, and placed in evidence bags for transport to the OSBI Forensic Lab in Oklahoma City. Upon hearing of the discovery, Rebecca Sloan, the officer handling the Rayburn file, was immediately notified. She and the Edmond PD technical chief arrived at the scene at 11:10. Standing at the edge of the pit, Rebecca examined the drum markings and could not ignore that RME matched Rayburn's former employer. Instinct prompted her to check her notebook and measure distance. The excavation was exactly 1.2 miles northeast of where the Ford F-100 was found in 1982. She wrote in the log, "Close proximity, within former Red Mesa operational area, high likelihood of connection." That afternoon, the entire drum and surrounding soil were transported to the lab. The preliminary report issued at 6 p.m. confirmed a male skeleton, approximate height 5'11", consistent with Thomas Rayburn's description. Upper molars showed silver fillings, matching dental records from his 1981 health insurance file. Emergency DNA comparison was ordered, using hair from Rayburn's comb. Evidence Rebecca had submitted in March. The lab extracted samples from femur and hair roots in a process lasting over 12 hours. On the morning of June 14th, results were printed, DNA matched 99.98%. The official report, signed by Dr. Charles Gorman, OSBI Biology Section Chief, concluded, skeletal remains recovered at Meadow Ridge site are those of Thomas Rayburn, missing since July 1982. Rebecca received the results at 9 a.m. and immediately forwarded them to the Payne County Chief Investigator. The report headline was bolded, "Identification confirmed. Thomas Rayburn." After 26 years, the identity of the man who left home on a summer morning in 1982 was finally established. All accompanying evidence, watch engraved TR, cord, oil-soaked fabric, and drum soil, was resealed under new case number MR08045. At the site, workers were allowed to resume after cleanup and fencing. On the old ground, the only trace left was the filled excavation pit. The smell of oil still lingered in the hot central Oklahoma midday breeze. The combined Edmond PD report sent to OSBA that day clearly stated, metal drum buried deep in former industrial yard, discovered containing human skeleton, and watch engraved TR. Identity confirmed, Thomas Rayburn. Copies were filed with Payne County and entered into the new electronic system, ending 2 decades of silence since the 1982 stamp. Presumed deceased, and replacing it with the official conclusion. Identified, homicide, under review. After the victim's identity was confirmed, all physical evidence recovered from the Meadow Ridge drum was transferred directly to the Oklahoma State Medical Examiner's Office for detailed forensic examination. On June 16, 2008, under the supervision of Dr. Charles Gorman, a forensic team consisting of 3 biologists, 2 crime scene technicians, and 1 toxicologist began unsealing the evidence bag, labeled MR08045. First, they placed the skeletal remains on a large stainless steel table, sorted each bone, and took digital photographs from multiple angles. The bone structure was remarkably well preserved due to immersion in drilling oil, an anaerobic environment that prevented soft tissue decomposition. After gentle cleaning with a mild alkaline solution, the team clearly identified narrow groove-like scratches on the cervical vertebrae, an arc-shaped indentation around the 2nd and 3rd vertebrae, characteristic of tensile pressure from a cylindrical object, most likely a wire or cable. These marks averaged 3.2 mm in depth, extended 9.1 centimeters, and were symmetrical on both sides, indicating deliberate and controlled ligature application while the victim was still alive. Additionally, the right 4th rib displayed a clean, sharp stab wound, approximately 3 centimeters deep, consistent with a small pointed instrument, such as a utility knife or screwdriver. The examiners concluded this was a perimortem injury due to microscopic evidence of biological tissue reaction at the wound edges. At the posterior skull region behind the left ear, they documented a 4 centimeters linear fracture with radiating crack lines, possibly caused by blunt force impact from a fall or blow. Under scanning electron microscopy, the cervical grooves contained black metallic residue. Spectral analysis identified it as a copper-nickel alloy, matching the composition of industrial electrical cable core and identical to the wire segment found wrapped around the neck inside the drum. The biomechanical death report stated, mechanism of death ligature strangulation with additional sharp force violence. Manner of death, asphyxia, due to ligature strangulation. Concurrent with the skeletal examination, the toxicology team analyzed the drum's drilling oil and sediment layer. Chemical analysis revealed the oil's heavy hydrocarbon profile matched 99% with Red Mesa Energy, South Field samples, and contained high concentrations of nitrate impurities, characteristic of recycled oil, used by the company in 1982 for equipment testing. This confirmed the drum originated directly from Red Mesa's inventory during the period Rayburn was employed there. At the drum bottom, examiners recovered a small gray plastic fragment believed to be part of a 5-gallon oil can handle, coated with the same oil residue. Beneath the sediment were fine yellowish-brown clay particles identified as local soil from County Road 5, proving the drum had been transported through that area before burial at Meadow Ridge. Remaining organic material in the oil, when viewed microscopically, revealed pale blue cellulose fibers and white synthetic fibers, matching the fabric scrap recovered at Dry Creek in 1982. The report detailed, material and oil evidence indicate the victim was placed in the drum with Red Mesa Energy technical materials, then covered with oil to conceal decomposition. Metallurgical analysis of the watch and ring showed oxidation consistent with 25-26 years of burial, with no post-burial mechanical disturbance. Oil residue identical to that in the drum was present on the ring band, confirming simultaneous burial. On June 18, Dr. Gorman finalized a 22-page report whose conclusion read, "Forensic evidence establishes cause of death as asphyxia due to industrial electrical cable ligature strangulation, with additional right chest stab wound causing contributory hemorrhage, no evidence of suicide or accident." He signed it for the OSBA director and forwarded copies to the Payne County Sheriff's Office. In the case classification section, bold text was added, "Case classification, homicide." Rebecca Sloan received the report that same afternoon, read every section carefully, and underlined in red the final page addendum, "Drum oil matches 1982 garage sample from victim's residence. Source probability 99.3%. She marked her personal notebook, "Homicide confirmed, source Red Mesa link." After more than 2 decades, the final conclusion completely reversed a file once closed for lack of a body. The forensic results not only confirmed Thomas Rayburn's death was premeditated murder, but matched every piece of 1982 evidence: drilling oil, fabric fibers, electrical cable, and Red Mesa-related locations. Everything was resealed under code MR08045A, awaiting transfer to state criminal investigation authorities. In the laboratory, as technicians turned off the lights, the last glow reflected off the stainless steel table where the skeleton had lain. The faint grooves on the cervical vertebrae remained visible under the cold light, final testimony to a death concealed for over 25 years. On June 20, 2008, 2 days after the forensic conclusion established Thomas Rayburn's death as homicide, the FBI Tulsa Field Office formally requested the Edmond Police Department and Payne County Sheriff's Office re-examine the entire 1982 missing person file, MP 82045, as a federal homicide with financial elements. The first meeting took place on the third-floor conference room of the OSBI, attended by Special Agent Stephen Garfinkel, who had previously headed financial fraud investigations in the early 1980s, now recalled as special consultant. Rebecca Sloan was appointed lead case coordinator, while forensic specialist Mike Hahn was tasked with reviewing, cross-referencing, and securing all evidence. The meeting lasted over 3 hours. Garfinkel opened by projecting a timeline of key Rayburn events: disappearance July 1982, discovery of the Ford F-100 on County Road, 5 oil stain in the garage, suspicious financial transactions between Red Mesa Energy and Miguel Torres, and recovery of remains in 2008. He emphasized, "This is no longer a missing person case. This is premeditated homicide, likely tied to federal financial fraud." After reviewing the forensic report, the team agreed to reopen the investigation under new case number Federal Case 08HC274, Thomas Rayburn Homicide. Sloan began restructuring data, scanning all 1982 paper records, entering them into the electronic case management system, and cross-checking every statement against existing physical evidence. Hahn inventoried old evidence: oil sample GR02, garage stain GR03, fabric scrap DC03, alongside new evidence, MR08045A. Everything was resealed to federal standards and moved to the 24-hour, monitored OSBI vault. Garfinkel requested a 2-column matrix, 1982 data versus 2008 data, to identify matches and gaps. Sloan worked 3 straight days to produce a 100-plus page review. The matrix revealed 6 repeated elements: Red Mesa Energy oil type, industrial electrical cable, evidence locations within a 2-mile radius, bank transactions with Miguel Torres, Rayburn, Red Mesa employment link, and the victim carrying financial records before disappearance. Garfinkel highlighted them in red, stating this constituted a unified chain, suggesting financial motive or fraud cover-up. He ordered retrieval of First National Bank Tulsa records 1982-1983 to trace transaction history. Sloan and FBI Tulsa sent formal requests for the bank's archived microfilm. Meanwhile, Hahn proposed reanalyzing the 1982 garage oil sample using modern mass spectrometry. His preliminary report confirmed chemical composition matched the drum oil with 99.6% source probability, reinforcing that the murder drum came directly from Red Mesa inventory. While awaiting bank records, Garfinkel and Sloan reviewed old statements. Miguel Torres's 1982 interview drew particular attention. He claimed meeting Rayburn in the garage the evening of July 15th and being told he would not need to drive the next morning. That detail, combined with the $150,000 transfer on July 13th and Red Mesa's equipment movement report, formed a tight 3-day sequence leading to disappearance. Garfinkel pointed at the timeline, only 3 days between the transfer and estimated time of death per forensics, direct connection highly likely. Sloan noted, motive financial concealment. The team agreed to pursue parallel financial and criminal tracks. On June 25th, the Rayburn file was officially entered into the FBI cold case database at Priority 1. Garfinkel signed task assignments, Rebecca Sloan, overall coordination, Mike Hahn, additional forensic examination, Special Agent Mark Denton, Bank and Red Mesa Energy liaison. Retired Detective Mendez, who led the original 1982 case, received an honorary consultant invitation with a copy of the reopening notice. At Edmond PD, the original file was digitized, crime scene photos and maps rescanned in high resolution, and every detail from footprints to drum location entered into integrated cold case mapping. Hahn synchronized old and new evidence, completing a technical comparison table, oil type, cable, soil, fibers, statistical similarity, and source probability. By month's end, a 54-page master report was submitted to the FBI Tulsa supervisory agent. The final bold conclusion read, all physical and forensic evidence consistent with homicide scenario linked to Red Mesa Energy and associated personnel. Further inquiry required. In the OSBI office, Rebecca Sloan closed the first electronic Rayburn master file on her computer. Case number Federal Case 08HC274 glowed on screen, marking the official reformation of the investigative team 26 years after the file had been closed with the simple notation, presumed deceased. In early July 2008, per federal team directive, Special Agent Mark Denton and Rebecca Sloan conducted a complete review of Red Mesa Energy financial transactions 1981-1983. First National Bank Tulsa had since been absorbed into a larger corporation, but microfilm records remained in secure nitrate storage. After several days of coordination, the archive released copies for investigation. On July 7th, Denton and Sloan were present at the bank's Tulsa data center, where film reels were kept in a climate-controlled basement vault. Technicians loaded the antique readers. Images appeared on frosted screens, showing dozens of July 1982 transactions. On Reel 47 they froze on the entry. Transfer, Red Mesa Energy, Miguel A. Torres, $150,000. July 13, 1982, authorized by T. Rayburn. Next to it was the scanned payment order bearing signature and company stamp. Sloan requested high-resolution prints for handwriting comparison with Rayburn's authenticated personnel file signature. On site, she ran FBI handwriting software overlay. The T and R in the suspicious document slanted 15 degrees right, with elongated final strokes, whereas Rayburn's genuine signature was compact and abrupt. Stroke frequency analysis showed 38% deviation, exceeding natural variation thresholds, sufficient for forgery suspicion. Denton immediately requested the teller's identity. bank HR records identified Elizabeth Price, now retired. On July 9th, Mrs. Price was interviewed and brought her old personal logbook. Shown the payment order photocopy, she confirmed it was authentic 1982 bank stationery and procedure, but could not recall the individual due to time elapsed. However, she stated firmly, the man who signed the customer line that day was not Mr. Rayburn. I remember Rayburn as tall with dark hair. This person was shorter, had an accent, and signed very quickly. The statement was recorded and transcribed. Immediately afterward, Sloan forwarded the order and authentic signatures to the OSBI question document section. Results returned July 12 concluded the transaction signature displayed tremor, lacked fluidity, and structural inconsistency with known exemplars, forgery probability, 95%. Report, forged signature consistent with manual imitation. Cross-referencing surviving blurry security footage showed a stocky, dark-haired male matching Miguel Torres's 1982 personnel photo. Sloan drafted an urgent report to Garfinkel and Denton, summarizing July 13th transaction, forged Rayburn signature, executed by Miguel Torres. Funds withdrawn entirely within 2 subsequent days. Mendez's 1982 suspicion was now scientifically validated. Garfinkel ordered expansion to all Rayburn-signed transactions in the 2 months prior to disappearance. Review uncovered 3 additional smaller transfers totaling $42,000 to subcontractor accounts also represented by Torres, all bearing the same distinctive right-slanted forged signature. Denton commented, "This is systematic conduct, not error." Sloan noted, "Pattern confirmed, fraudulent transfers." Concurrent OSBI infrared spectroscopy on the documents revealed the forgery used Parker Quink Inc. 1981 batch, whereas Rayburn used Waterman Blue in the Red Mesa office. Parker Quink was standard in the accounting department, where Miguel Torres worked before Rayburn hired him as driver. Comparison with Torres's 1979 job application handwriting showed near-identical T and R formation. The lab noted, handwriting similarities indicate possible same author. Garfinkel reviewed the report, pointed to the conclusion, and stated, "We have a forger with financial motive and direct access to the victim." Sloan added to the summary, "Primary objective confirmed forger identity, Miguel Torres." A separate financial subfile FC82045F was created. Garfinkel directed Denton to request the Federal Reserve verification of the payment order serial numbers and original issuer in case of internal Red Mesa collusion. In her July 14 memo, Sloan wrote, July 13, 1982 transaction confirmed forged T. Rayburn signature. Executor, with high probability, Miguel Torres, sole employee, with access to signature samples and company financial records. Next objective, prove forgery occurred at Red Mesa offices immediately prior to victim disappearance. The 14-page report was attached to Federal Case 08-HC-274, marking the first concrete step proving Thomas Rayburn's death was not only murder, but inextricably tied to a 2-decade-long financial fraud cover-up. On July 16, 2008, immediately after the handwriting analysis confirmed that the transaction dated July 13, 1982, bore a forged signature of Thomas Rayburn, the federal investigative team compiled all collected data to identify the primary suspect. Rebecca Sloan was tasked with preparing the summary table, which listed 3 categories of evidence: financial, testimonial, and personal relationships. The financial category included bank records from Tulsa confirming a $150,000 transfer from Red Mesa Energy to Miguel A. Torres's personal account, plus 3 smaller transactions totaling $42,000 to subsidiary accounts represented by Torres. All payment orders carried Rayburn's forged signature, matching the handwriting on Torres's 1979 job application. The testimonial section included Miguel's 1982 statement, in which he claimed that on the evening of July 15, he met Rayburn at the garage and was told, "You don't need to come in tomorrow," then heard the next morning that his boss had disappeared. When cross-referenced with financial records, this timeline coincided exactly 3 days after the fraudulent transaction. Linda Rayburn's statement also mentioned a phone call on the evening of July 15, during which her husband said, "Tomorrow I'll bring it," a detail that could directly relate to the embezzled funds. The investigators noted 3 consecutive events: July 13th, forged transaction; July 15th, meeting at the garage; July 16th, Rayburn's disappearance. This timeline was presented in Sloan's diagram, connected by red arrows, illustrating the alignment between financial data and witness statements. The personal relationship category showed Torres had a close 7-year working relationship with Rayburn, was trusted with garage keys, company vehicles and files. Red Mesa personnel records indicated Torres had previously worked in accounting before becoming Rayburn's personal driver, making him one of the few people familiar with Rayburn's signature habits and transfer procedures. Additionally, the chief accountant's statement confirmed that only Rayburn and Torres had access to the safe containing blank payment order forms. Recovered 1982 landline telephone records from microfilm backups revealed 4 calls between the Rayburn residence and the Red Mesa office outside business hours in the 2 weeks before the disappearance, 3 of which occurred in the evening and lasted over 10 minutes. All were marked on the timeline and corresponded to nights Torres was on duty at the facility. When presenting the compilation, Garfinkel concluded, "The only individual with financial motive, access opportunity, and technical knowledge to commit the forgery is Miguel Torres." Mike Hahn added supporting forensic data, oil samples collected in the garage in 1982 and from the drum containing the remains in 2008, both originated from Red Mesa Energy. The type of oil Torres was authorized to take from the technical warehouse due to his prior transport assignments. Upon reviewing personnel files, the team discovered Torres's resignation letter was signed July 22, 1982, just 6 days after Rayburn vanished, and was unusually approved by the acting administrative assistant without the technical director's signature. Immediately afterward, according to tax records, Torres changed his address to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and severed all contact with Red Mesa. The FBI Tulsa report confirmed he had no prior criminal record, but bank records showed the account that received the illegal funds was emptied and closed in August 1982. When all data was connected, Sloan wrote in the preliminary conclusion, "Miguel A. Torres, Red Mesa Energy employee, possessed financial motive, opportunity, material means, and concealment behavior." Garfinkel requested an internal probability assessment. The team unanimously rated it high probability, primary suspect. During the summary meeting on July 18, Denton presented the official report to the FBI Tulsa Regional Director. The 27-page document included appendices with photographs of the forged signatures, the timeline diagram, and transaction tables. The final page was bolded. Based on financial, behavioral, and circumstantial evidence, Miguel A. Torres is identified as the primary suspect in the homicide of Thomas Rayburn. After signing, the regional director approved Phase 2 of the investigation, authorizing surveillance and collection of new data on Torres. Sloan, Hahn, and Denton left the meeting late, carrying copies of the completed file. In Rebecca's notebook, the last line written in red ink read 1982. Missing 2008, suspect identified, name Miguel Torres. After more than 26 years, a name that had previously appeared only in witness statements was now officially placed at the center of the Rayburn case, like the final piece that closed a chain of seemingly unrelated facts into a clear picture of the only person who possessed motive, opportunity, and means to kill Thomas Rayburn. Immediately after Miguel Torres was designated the primary suspect, the federal investigative team shifted to target surveillance. Federal tax and population database records showed Miguel currently resided in Albuquerque, New Mexico, had renewed his driver's license in 1998, and listed his occupation as freelance mechanic. The address on file was 2411 West Lomas Boulevard, a quiet residential area west of downtown. On July 22, 2008, Special Agent Mark Denton led a 3-person surveillance team from Tulsa to Albuquerque, coordinating with the local FBI branch. They set up a small rented apartment across from Miguel's house as an observation post. Miguel, now in his 50s, lived alone, typically appeared in green work clothes, drove an old red Dodge pickup, and kept a regular schedule from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. He worked at a private garage called Valley Auto Repairs, 2 blocks from his home. The owner described him as reliable, quiet, and rarely talks about his past. The surveillance team monitored his routine for 2 weeks. Logging: leaves home in the morning, stops at a coffee shop, works at the garage, returns in the evening. Occasionally stops at a hardware store. No significant social contacts, no wife or children, no close friends. Rebecca Sloan, back at Tulsa headquarters, received daily reports and simultaneously prepared a plan to collect indirect DNA samples for comparison with 1982 evidence. On August 2nd, after Miguel left his usual coffee shop on the corner of Central Avenue, Agent Denton entered, retrieved the paper cup still bearing lip marks and the plastic straw, and secured them as sample MG08A1. 2 days later, the team collected a half-smoked cigarette Miguel discarded outside the garage, coded MG08A2. Both samples were sealed, labeled, and rushed to the OSBI laboratory in Oklahoma City via special transport. While awaiting results, surveillance continued. Miguel occasionally received mail from a Santa Fe address, sender unknown. Behavior remained consistent, with no indication he was aware of being watched. On August 8th, DNA results were transmitted to Tulsa. Saliva from the straw and cigarette filter matched 100% with the unidentified biological sample extracted from the oil-stained rag collected in Rayburn's garage in 1982. Genetic analysis showed 99.997% similarity, ruling out random coincidence. The report, signed by Dr. Charles Gorman, stated, DNA profile from MG08A1 and GR03 match. Source identified as Miguel A. Torres. Upon receiving the results, Rebecca Sloan printed an updated evidence relationship map connecting the data points: Red Mesa drilling oil, forged signature, transferred funds, DNA in the garage. DNA collected in Albuquerque. The red arrows formed an unbroken line. Garfinkel read the report and nodded. We have direct biological evidence linking the suspect to the crime scene. For independent verification, the Federal Forensic Lab cross-checked the samples. The archived GR03 was sent to Washington, D.C. On August 12th, the second test confirmed complete identity, eliminating any possibility of error. The consolidated report's final line was bolded. Subject Miguel A. Torres positively linked to crime scene through biological trace. After Denton reported by phone to Garfinkel, surveillance continued, but shifted to a lower profile. A small camera was installed across from Miguel's front door to record daily activity. Utility and bank records were also obtained. Miguel was paid in cash by the garage, lived frugally, had almost empty savings account. No signs of money laundering. However, agents noticed multiple small packages mailed to him from Santa Fe, containing only mechanical parts, otherwise unremarkable. Everything was fully documented in the surveillance log. At FBI Tulsa headquarters, Rebecca Sloan finalized an 18-page report for Garfinkel and the regional director. The first page stated clearly, subject Miguel A. Torres, residence verified, routine monitored, DNA match confirmed with 1982 evidence. Garfinkel wrote by hand in the comments section, biological confirmation establishes direct forensic link. Proceed with Step 2, evidence consolidation and background review. Sloan co-signed and sent copies to Mike Hand for the forensic file. That evening, as Denton wrote the final entry in the surveillance log, Miguel appeared on his porch, lit a cigarette, sat on an old metal chair, and stared toward the Sandia Mountains glowing in the sunset. The scene was calm. Nothing suggested he knew he was under federal surveillance. From the rented apartment across the street, the camera lens continued recording the image of the solitary middle-aged man, the man around whom, after more than 26 years, every piece of evidence was tightening, starting from a tiny DNA trace on an oily rag in an Edmond garage in 1982, now confirmed as an exact match. On August 14, 2008, while the Albuquerque surveillance team maintained covert operations on Miguel Torres, an unexpected development occurred in Santa Fe. Local police arrested a man named Leonard "Lenny" Torres, age 39, Miguel's first cousin, for stealing a pickup truck in the parking lot of a Lowe's store. Background checks revealed Lenny had been briefly investigated in the 1983 Red Mesa Energy financial fraud case, but never charged. The information was immediately cross-referenced and forwarded to Garfinkel's team at FBI Tulsa. Special Agent Mark Denton and 2 agents were dispatched to Santa Fe for a preliminary interview. According to the initial record, Lenny claimed he took the truck because he owed money and needed to get around quickly, but when asked about his relationship with Miguel Torres, his expression changed, he avoided eye contact, and gave evasive answers. Financial records showed Lenny had received a $5,000 transfer from Miguel's account in March 2007, with no professional justification. When questioned, Lenny called it family helping family, but his tense demeanor raised Denton's suspicions of a deeper connection. On August 17, Lenny was transferred to temporary federal detention for the investigation. Rebecca Sloan and Denton met him in person, bringing the Rayburn file and photographs of the Meadow Ridge drum. Initially, Lenny refused to talk, insisting he was uninvolved, but after more than 2 hours of questioning, and when Denton mentioned the DNA match linking Miguel to the 1982 evidence, he fell silent for a long time. Then whispered, "I know about that. I helped him bury it." The statement silenced the room. The recorded statement began at 1542, with a public defender present as witness. Lenny stated that in mid-July 1982, when he was 13 years old and living with his parents on the outskirts of Edmond, his cousin Miguel arrived one evening in a pickup, said he needed to move some company technical equipment, and asked Lenny to come along to help dig a hole. They left around 9 p.m., drove east to vacant land near the Red Mesa storage yard. Miguel stopped, opened the truck bed. Inside was a slightly dented metal drum that smelled of oil. When Lenny asked what was inside, Miguel said only, "Don't look, just help me bury it and be done." By flashlight, they dug a hole about 10 feet deep, covered it with sand, and pulled a tarp over it. Miguel paid Lenny $50 and told him never to tell anyone. Lenny said for years he thought it was just industrial waste, but when he saw news in early June about the discovered remains and heard Red Mesa mentioned, he couldn't sleep. The statement was fully recorded and cross-checked against the Rayburn timeline. When Rebecca Sloan showed Lenny the Meadow Ridge map, he pointed to a spot near the intersection of County Road 5 and an old dirt slope, the exact location where the drum was found in 2008, off by less than 20 meters. Lenny said, "Back then it was open land with a wooden sign that said Red Mesa Storage Area. We buried it right next to that sign." The map was signed in the record with the note, "Subject indicates burial site consistent with 2008 discovery." Throughout the interview, Lenny was conflicted, sometimes insisting he didn't know there was a body, sometimes saying that smell was strange, not like oil. When asked why he never reported it, he answered, "I was a kid. I was scared." He said it was something that could put me in prison if I talked. All details were recorded verbatim. For verification, the team showed Lenny crime scene photos of the drum, including the watch engraved TR and the electrical cord around the skeletal neck. Stared for a long time, then said quietly, "I remember there was a coil of wire in the bed. Miguel took it from the garage." That statement matched exactly the 1982 evidence report, nickel copper industrial wire with dark sheathing, the type used in Red Mesa's technical warehouse. After the statement, Denton asked Lenny to draw a diagram of the burial area. The rough hand-drawn sketch clearly showed the dirt road, wooden fence, and hole location, all matching current satellite imagery of Meadow Ridge. The drawing was numbered LT0801 and attached to the file. On August 19th, the 23-page report was sent to FBI Tulsa headquarters with the signed statement. Sloan's summary read, "Witness Leonard Torres confirms participation in burying the drum containing Thomas Rayburn's body at Miguel Torres's request in 1982, provided diagram matching 2008 recovery location." Garfinkel reviewed the entire file and ordered GPS verification. The OSBI technical team compared the coordinates Lenny indicated with the actual site, error less than 25 meters, confirming high accuracy. The technical report stated, "Witness statement consistent with physical discovery coordinates." In the conclusion, Garfinkel wrote by hand, "Statement highly credible, strengthens direct link between Miguel Torres and body disposal." Lenny Torres was held in protective custody and became the investigation's key witness. That night, Rebecca Sloan stayed late in the Tulsa FBI office, rereading the statement with an indescribable feeling. For more than 26 years, the evidence had been faint. Now a memory from a 13-year-old boy perfectly matched the actual burial coordinates, a detail that could be neither coincidence nor fabrication. In her work log, she wrote the final line, "Witness confirms drum burial coordinates match." Thomas Rayburn case now has its first direct witness. On August 21, 2008, after Lenny Torres's statement was verified and cross-checked with crime scene data, the federal team compiled all evidence to prepare the prosecution file. Rebecca Sloan and Special Agent Mark Denton worked through the night at FBI Tulsa to produce an over 80-page comprehensive report divided into three main sections: physical evidence, DNA, financial evidence, forged bank transactions, and witness testimony, Lenny Torres's confession. The physical section detailed the DNA sample from 1982 garage rag GR03 matched 100% with indirect DNA samples from Miguel Torres collected in Albuquerque in August 2008. Random match probability less than 1 in 100 billion, independently confirmed by 2 laboratories. The financial section presented the transfers from Red Mesa Energy accounts, proving Thomas Rayburn's signature was forged and Miguel Torres was the sole beneficiary, totaling $192,000, executed 3 days before the victim vanished. The report attached the handwriting analysis concluding 95% probability of forgery, plus bank teller Elizabeth Price's statement describing the person who conducted the transaction as short, dark-haired, with a strange accent, consistent with Torres's appearance. The witness section included Leonard Lenny Torres's 17-page statement in which he admitted helping Miguel bury the drum in the ground near the Red Mesa storage lot on the night of July 15, 1982. Lenny provided a diagram perfectly matching the 2008 recovery site and described materials in the truck: drum, drilling oil, coil of electrical wire, all consistent with existing evidence. Rebecca organized all documents chronologically, marking key dates: 7/13, forged transfer 7/15, garage meeting 7/16, disappearance 1982, case closed 2008, body discovered, and DNA match. Garfinkel reviewed the summary and confirmed the 3 pillars of the case are complete: financial motive, physical evidence, direct witness. He instructed Denton to prepare the formal submission to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Oklahoma. On the morning of August 23, the entire team attended a closed-door meeting at the federal prosecutor's office in Oklahoma City, with Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Delaney. Sloan presented the chain of events, Garfinkel added investigative technical details, and Hahn reported laboratory findings. After 2 hours of discussion, Delaney concluded, the file satisfies the requirements to prosecute under federal law for murder in furtherance of financial fraud and interstate transportation of remains. She requested an appendix proving Miguel Torres fled Oklahoma immediately after the crime. Data already held by FBI Tulsa. By afternoon, the arrest warrant was drafted, listing the preliminary charge, murder in furtherance of financial fraud, Porated USC Section 11. Delaney signed the document at 17:26. The red seal of the U.S. Attorney's Office was clearly stamped on the cover page, officially authorizing the FBI to execute the arrest of Miguel Torres. The warrant included authority to seize related property, including the Albuquerque residence and Dodge pickup, with an open evidence list. Sloan faxed copies to the FBI field office in New Mexico, where Denton's surveillance team remained active. At 1810, the warrant was officially entered into the federal NCIC system. Garfinkel read the title aloud while the team was still in the conference room, United States of America versus Miguel Torres. A brief silence filled the room. After more than 26 years, a case once closed as presumed deceased now had an active arrest warrant. Sloan gathered the files, signed the lead investigator confirmation section, feeling both relief and tension. Garfinkel ordered Denton to execute the arrest plan, emphasizing, "Do not let him leave New Mexico." Outside, the late summer Oklahoma sky turned golden. The last rays of sunlight reflected off the conference table where the red seal was still wet, marking August 23, 2008. The day the Thomas Rayburn case officially moved from cold case status to active criminal prosecution, with one name now on every document, Miguel Torres. On the morning of September 14, 2009, nearly 1 year after the arrest warrant was issued, the FBI Tulsa field office, in coordination with the Albuquerque division, executed the plan to arrest Miguel Torres. The delay had been deliberate to finalize extradition procedures and verify additional physical evidence, ensuring the federal prosecution case was airtight before moving in. The final briefing took place at 5:30 a.m. that day in the Albuquerque FBI office, led by Special Agent Mark Denton and overseen remotely by federal prosecutor Karen Delaney via secure video link. The operation, code-named Operation Mesa, deployed 2 teams, one for the arrest, the other to execute search warrants on the residence and vehicle. At 6:12 a.m., 4 unmarked agent vehicles moved quietly along Lomas Boulevard and stopped less than a block from apartment 2411, Miguel's residence. From an observation post across the street, surveillance cameras captured the moment the suspect stepped out of the apartment, dressed in work clothes and carrying a tool bag. As he approached his red Dodge parked in the lot, Agent Denton gave the signal. 2 vehicles boxed him in front and rear, and agents rapidly closed in. Denton shouted, "Miguel Torres, FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest." Miguel turned, had no time to react, and was immediately taken down, handcuffed, and read his Miranda rights. He did not resist. His only question was, What is this about?" Denton answered curtly, "Thomas Rayburn." By 6:20 a.m., Miguel was in a transport vehicle en route to the federal holding facility in Albuquerque for initial processing. Immediately afterward, the second team executed the pre-signed search warrant on the apartment. The small unit was sparsely furnished, a few New Mexico landscape photos on the walls, a desk near the window. In a wooden desk drawer, agents located an old 1981 map of Edmond, Oklahoma, marked in red ink around the county road, 5 area with handwritten notation, Red Mesa Lot, closed. The map was sealed as evidence item MG0901. On a shelf near the door, they recovered a coil of gray nylon industrial rope over 2 meters long, tagged MG0902. In a cabinet under the kitchen sink was a paper folder containing old First National Bank Tulsa statements and 3 documents bearing the forged signature, T. Rayburn. Everything was photographed, sealed, and transferred to the OSBI lab under federal chain of custody protocol. Miguel's personal computer was also seized. The hard drive contained numerous files documenting old Red Mesa energy debts and employee rosters from 1981, 1982. Forensic Agent Han noted in the log, "Evidence consistent with financial investigative elements likely strengthens motive." By 7:45 a.m., the search was complete and the apartment temporarily sealed. Meanwhile, at FBI headquarters, Miguel was placed in an interview room with court-appointed counsel present. He remained calm, admitted having worked at Red Mesa, but refused to discuss Thomas Rayburn, saying only, "I don't know anything about that. You've got the wrong man." Sloan, monitoring via video from Tulsa, noted stable demeanor, no signs of panic. When shown the Edmond map, Miguel fell silent, looked down, and clenched his hands. Garfinkel ordered the interview terminated after 45 minutes to avoid any Miranda issues. Denton's internal report stated, subject cooperated on identity, denied knowledge of Rayburn case, non-aggressive. At 9:30 a.m., Miguel A. Torres was formally booked into federal custody under the warrant from the Northern District of Oklahoma, pending extradition. The evidence seizure report ran 19 pages with detailed descriptions, photographs, and GPS coordinates for each item. Transfer paperwork was co-signed by agents Denton and Hand. The prisoner transport flight departed Albuquerque at 14:15 and landed at Will Rogers World Airport, Oklahoma City, at 16:02. Oklahoma federal marshals took custody and delivered him to the federal detention facility in Tulsa under high security. That evening, prosecutor Karen Delaney signed confirmation of arrest completion and issued an order of detention without bond, pursuant to 18 U.S.C. Section 3142b. Rebecca Sloan noted in her log, the 14th of September 2009, Miguel Torres arrested, evidence seized, Edmund Map, nylon rope, financial docs, extradited to Oklahoma. Garfinkel hand-wrote at the bottom of the final report, 27 years, but the circle closes today. At Tulsa FBI headquarters, as the last documents were sealed into Federal Case 08, HC 274, the bright overhead lights reflected off the thick case jacket, marking the moment the Thomas Rayburn investigation, after nearly 3 decades, had entered its decisive phase. The prime suspect was in custody and returned to the state where the story began. Oklahoma. On September 15, 2009, just 1 day after extradition to Oklahoma, Miguel A. Torres was brought to the Tulsa FBI interview suite for formal questioning under the supervision of federal prosecutor Karen Delaney and lead investigator Rebecca Sloan. The session began at 9 a.m. and lasted over 4 continuous hours. Miguel appeared in an orange jumpsuit, wrists still bearing cuff marks, face calm but eyes evasive. After Miranda was re-administered, he nodded that he understood and agreed to speak. Sloan's first question concerned his relationship with Thomas Rayburn. Miguel replied, "I worked for him, drove him around, sometimes helped check paperwork. He was a good guy but had a lot of trouble with the company and the bank." Asked about the last time he saw Rayburn, he said, "That night, Thomas told me he was leaving for good and needed me to help get a drum out of the garage. Then he wouldn't be coming back." Delaney asked directly, "Did you know what was in that drum?" Miguel paused, then answered, "I never opened it. He said he wanted to disappear, needed me to get it out of town. He insisted Rayburn wanted to fake his disappearance to escape debt, and that he only helped move the drum to an empty lot near Red Mesa at Rayburn's request, then left and never returned." When Sloan showed him crime scene photos of the body inside the drum, Miguel stared for a long moment, face tightening but showing no overt emotion. He said quietly, "I didn't kill him. I swear to God." However, when questioned about the electrical cord around the victim's neck and the medical examiner's finding of death by strangulation, Miguel offered no response. Delaney confronted him with the 1982 DNA evidence from the garage, biological material on an oily rag that matched Miguel's profile exactly, proving he was present immediately before the victim vanished. Miguel countered, "I worked on his cars all the time. I probably left traces while working, nothing unusual." Sloan shifted to financial records, producing copies of the fraudulent $150,000 transfer bearing a forged signature. When asked about forging it, Miguel reacted strongly. "No, Thomas signed that. He needed cash to disappear. I just helped move the money." Delaney pressed, "Then why did the money go into your account?" Miguel bit his lip and answered, "He asked me to hold it for him. He said he'd come back for it later." When Garfinkel entered the room, he said only Thomas Rayburn has been found in a Red Mesa drilling fluid drum, the same fluid you used to transport. Miguel fell silent, looked at the floor, and let out a soft sigh. "I didn't think he was dead." The entire interview was recorded and transcribed the same day. The summary report read, "Suspect claims victim orchestrated disappearance, denies homicide, admits participation in transporting drum." When cross-referenced with forensic data and Leonard Torres's statement, numerous contradictions emerged. Lenny clearly stated that Miguel drove that night, single-handedly rolled the drum into the hole, ordered him not to look inside, poured drilling fluid on top, then buried it, behavior consistent with disposal of a body, not assisting a staged disappearance. The contradictions were starkest in the DNA evidence. If Rayburn was still alive when he left the garage, Miguel's biological material would not appear on a rag, bearing dried blood and dead skin cells that matched Rayburn's DNA. Mike Hand delivered the comparative analysis to the prosecutor that afternoon, confirming the biological traces were deposited at the exact time of the homicide, ruling out coincidence. Garfinkel's report to the U.S. Attorney's Office concluded, suspect's statement is inconsistent with physical, financial, and witness evidence, appears designed to mitigate criminal liability. After reviewing the full file, Delaney elected to retain the charge of second-degree murder under Title 21 Section 701, 8 Oklahoma statutes, with aggravating circumstances of financially motivated killing and technically sophisticated body disposal. At 17 o'clock, she signed continued detention without bond and forwarded the preliminary indictment to the Northern District Federal Court. Sloan's daily summary was brief. Miguel Torres denies, claims victim staged disappearance, contradicted by all DNA and witness evidence, second-degree murder charge stands. As she signed her name, the yellow lights in the interview room across the hall remained on, illuminating the empty chair where Miguel Torres had just sat, and on the table lay the charging document bearing the bold heading, United States versus Miguel A. Torres, Count F, second-degree murder. On September 17, 2009, 3 days after the formal interview ended and the second-degree murder charge was upheld, the OSBI forensic team, in coordination with the Federal Crime Lab in Tulsa, began comprehensive supplemental testing of all Rayburn case evidence. The focus was absolute correlation among oil, soil, and nylon cord samples recovered from the burial drum at Meadow Ridge, Rayburn's garage, and Red Mesa Energy's technical stores, facilities, to which Miguel Torres had access. Under Dr. Mike Hand's direct supervision, 3 parallel analysis groups were formed, each handling a separate sample type to ensure result independence. First, the chemistry unit compared drilling fluid samples. Vials Meter 0801, drum, GR02, garage, and RMESF2, Red Mesa stores were opened simultaneously in a sealed pressure chamber. Mass spectrometry showed hydrocarbon spectra identical across 18 primary markers, including the rare characteristic of iso-octane 0.87% above industry standard, unique to the single June 1982 production batch from Red Mesa Energy South Field. Residue in the burial drum also contained trace amounts of internal lubricant additive, RMEL21, recorded as used only for hydraulic pump testing during the exact period Rayburn was employed. Hand's preliminary note: all oil samples originate from the same Red Mesa Energy South Field, June 1982 batch, random match probability 0.1%. Carbon isotope retesting confirmed identical Fa13C ratios. Next, the forensic geology unit examined soil from the drum bottom, burial pit surface, and garage floor. Under electron microscopy, samples MR08-2 and GR04 both contained Montmorillonite clay mixed with red iron oxide, characteristic of the county road 5 area east of Edmond, entirely distinct from the sandy strata at the new Meadow Ridge site. This proved the drum had been in an environment matching the garage or Rayburn's property before burial. Additionally, MR08-2 contained microscopic green cellulose fibers matching fragment DC03, recovered from Dry Creek in 1982. Geology conclusion: soil inside drum highly consistent with Rayburn garage sample, inconsistent with Meadow Ridge stratigraphy, drum was moved from elsewhere. Concurrently, the materials unit tested the nylon rope coil, seized from Miguel's apartment against the electrical cord, looped around the skeletal neck. Fiber microscopy revealed identical 3-core twisted structure, PA6 polymer sheath, manufactured by Eagle Cable Company. Product code 1981A. Same as cord purchased by Red Mesa for the South Field project, verified by company invoices still archived in Houston. The cord from the drum bore laser-etched marking E81A, an exact match to sealed reference samples still in Red Mesa storage. Error probability 0%. Combined testing confirmed the rope from Miguel's home and the ligature from the drum were the same type, same production lot, and highly likely removed from Red Mesa stores in 1982, directly within the suspect's work scope. When the groups merged data, Hahn ordered a unified statistical model. OSBI software calculated the probability of all 3 sample classes matching by chance as 1 in 4.2 million. Scientifically, they were conclusively from the same source. The consolidated report, printed on the afternoon of September 20th, was 31 pages with 18 spectral charts and comparison photos. Hahn's signed conclusion. Supplemental forensic analysis establishes complete correlation between 1982, 2008 crime scene evidence and Red Mesa Energy Materials, confirms direct link between suspect Miguel A. Torres and evidence handling. Copies reached the U.S. Attorney's Office, Northern District of Oklahoma, at 1740 that day. Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Delaney signed receipt and wrote in the margin, "Forensic consistency established, evidence sufficient for formal indictment." Rebecca Sloan simultaneously updated Federal Case 08 HC 274 in the electronic system, tagging it Critical Forensic Confirmation. In her log, oil, soil, cord, perfect match, Red Mesa source, report to prosecution. At the OSBA lab, Mike Hahn returned the samples to cold storage. On his workbench lay maps, spectral charts, and cord sections side by side, all pointing to the same inescapable conclusion. The Thomas Rayburn case was no longer built on witnesses or inference alone. It now rested on unassailable scientific evidence, linking the drum beneath the ground directly to Red Mesa Energy stores, and from there to the hands of Miguel Torres. On September 25, 2009, 5 days after the OSBA supplemental forensic report was delivered, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Oklahoma finalized the criminal indictment against Miguel A. Torres, formally transitioning the file from investigation to federal prosecution. The indictment contained 3 principal counts: second-degree murder, 18 U.S.C. Section 1111, obstruction of justice, Section 1503, and federal wire fraud, Section 1343. Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Delaney personally drafted and filed it with the federal court in Oklahoma City. In the opening argument section, Delaney stated, "Physical, biological, and financial evidence collectively prove an intentional homicide carried out to conceal large-scale federal fraud." Attached was the complete evidentiary package, matching DNA results, oil-soil cord forensic reports, the Edmund map seized from Miguel's residence, Tulsa bank records, and the sworn statement of witness Leonard Torres. At 10 a.m., a special federal grand jury of 16 members was convened to hear a summary presentation. Agent Garfinkel, representing the FBI, outlined the 26-plus-year investigation from Rayburn's disappearance to body recovery. He emphasized 3 pillars of proof: financial motive, via the $150,000 embezzlement, Miguel's DNA at the garage and on evidence, and direct eyewitness testimony of body disposal. The grand jury voted 16-0 to return a true bill. That same day, the court changed the case status from pretrial detention to active prosecution and assigned U.S. District Judge David Merritt to preside. Miguel was brought to the courtroom for formal reading of the charges. Wearing a gray jail jumpsuit, he stood silently as Delaney read each count. When she reached second-degree murder of Thomas Rayburn, Miguel shook his head and whispered, "I didn't kill anybody." Judge Merritt instructed him to remain silent and asked defense counsel for a plea. Court-appointed attorney Alan Price entered not guilty, on all 3 counts. The arraignment lasted under 10 minutes, but marked the official start of trial proceedings. Outside the courthouse, local reporters noted this was the first time a 1982 missing person case had been revived and prosecuted federally. Concurrently, the U.S. Attorney's Office evaluated the role of key witness Leonard "Lenny" Torres. Given his voluntary cooperation, truthful statements, and lack of evidence of direct involvement in the homicide, Delaney executed a witness agreement. Lenny's Santa Fe auto theft sentence was reduced to 3 years probation in exchange for full testimony as a government witness. On September 27, Lenny signed the agreement, swore willingness to testify, and passed a mandatory polygraph that confirmed consistency with the investigation. Delaney's memo to Garfinkel, witness credibility, confirmed. In Tulsa, Sloan and Hahn finalized the case appendix, 12 volumes totaling over 2,000 pages, numbered and sealed in chronological order, crime scene evidence, DNA reports, financial records, witness statements, and investigative history from 1982 forward. Garfinkel's report to the FBI regional director stated, "This is a complete investigative file meeting federal prosecution standards. Direct and circumstantial evidence connecting Miguel Torres to the crimes exceeds the reasonable doubt threshold." On September 29, 2009, the U.S. Attorney's Office released an official statement, United States of America, versus Miguel A. Torres. The defendant is indicted on charges of second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and financial fraud related to the 1982 disappearance and death of engineer Thomas Rayburn. The release went out over national wire services, marking the public return of a once-forgotten case. In the Tulsa FBI office, Rebecca Sloan stood before the case board, where the headline now read clearly, "The Rayburn investigation had entered the prosecution phase." Every piece, from the drilling fluid and DNA to the testimony of the 13-year-old boy from 1982, had completed its 27-year journey, closing the investigative chapter and opening the one in which justice would be decided inside a federal courtroom. On the morning of May 3, 2010, nearly 8 months after Miguel A. Torres was formally indicted, the federal trial in the case of United States v. Miguel A. Torres opened at the United States District Court for the Northern District of Oklahoma. Presided over by Judge David Merritt, the courtroom was packed. Local press and national wire services were present because of the extraordinary nature of the case. A 1982 disappearance prosecuted almost 3 decades later. The prosecution was led by Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Delaney. FBI agents Garfinkel and Rebecca Sloan attended as investigative advisors. Defending Miguel Torres was attorney Alan Price. When brought in, Miguel wore a gray suit, his hair significantly grayer, his demeanor calm but his eyes wary. After preliminary procedures, Delaney began the prosecution's opening statement to the 12-person jury. "This case is a 27-year journey of justice. Today you will hear about what was hidden beneath Oklahoma soil, drilling oil, electrical wire, DNA samples, and the words of a witness who, as a 13-year-old boy, watched his cousin bury a 55-gallon drum." She displayed a timeline diagram illustrating each step. July 13, 1982. Forged $150,000, Thomas Rayburn signature transaction. July 15, Rayburn last seen in his garage. July 16, reported missing. 2008, body discovered and DNA identified. She emphasized, every physical trace, every bank figure, and every statement points to one person, Miguel A. Torres. The prosecution then presented evidence in groups. The first was DNA evidence. Dr. Charles Gorman of the OSBI was called to the stand and testified that the DNA sample from Exhibit Jar 03 in the garage was an exact match to the sample taken from Miguel Torres in 2008. Under magnification on the screen, he pointed to the genetic comparison chart, stating the probability of random match was 1 in 100 billion. Next, Dr. Mike Hahn testified regarding the oil, soil, and nylon cord analyses. All exhibits originated from the same source, the Red Mesa Energy Storage Yard, where the defendant worked and had access. Delaney then introduced financial evidence of financial fraud, presenting certified bank records from Tulsa, showing the clearly forged Rayburn signature, along with handwriting analysis concluding the forger was Miguel Torres. Bank employee Elizabeth Price testified that she processed the 1982 transaction, and the signer was not Thomas Rayburn. Finally, the key witness, Leonard Lenny Torres, was called. Dressed in a white shirt, voice trembling, he recounted the summer night in 1982. Miguel called me to help, said he needed to bury something at the yard. I saw a drum, heavy, smelling of oil. He told me not to ask questions, just dig. When asked about the location, he pointed to the diagram on the screen, matching exactly the recovery site. The courtroom fell silent. Delaney concluded direct examination by asking, "Did you see anyone else there besides Miguel?" Lenny answered, "No, just us." Defense attorney Alan Price rose for cross-examination, beginning by questioning the reliability of a witness who traded testimony for leniency. He stressed, Lenny Torres is a convicted felon currently on probation, thanks to a deal with the prosecution. Everything he says must be viewed with skepticism. He asked the judge for permission to introduce documents about the plea deal as evidence of motive. Delaney objected, arguing the reduction was a lawful federal cooperation agreement. After a brief sidebar, Judge Merritt allowed the defense to introduce the documents, but limited the scope of questioning. Price addressed the jury, "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution rests on the word of a man who stole for a living and traded his freedom to accuse his own cousin. Can you trust someone like that?" He pressed on the legality of the testimony. "Were you promised no prosecution if you testified in a way favorable to the government?" Lenny replied, "No, I just wanted to tell the truth." Price tried to exploit inconsistencies, but Lenny held firm, insisting he only helped Miguel bury the drum and did not know a body was inside. Nevertheless, the cross-examination left the courtroom tense. Rebecca Sloan noted defense challenges witness credibility. Delaney immediately adjusted tactics, shifting to reinforce scientific evidence. She recalled Dr. Han to emphasize, whether the witness exists or not, the physical evidence does not change. DNA, drilling oil, soil, wire, all match the source and lead to Miguel Torres. Following that statement, Delaney displayed crime scene photos of the drum, the watch engraved TR, and the DNA comparison chart, reconnecting the entire chain of evidence. The defense continued to challenge the 1982 collection procedures, claiming evidence was not preserved to modern standards. However, Gorman reaffirmed samples were sealed and continuously refrigerated. Storage protocol has been fully verified. At the end of the first day, Judge Merritt recorded all evidence admitted as valid under federal forensic standards. The courtroom slowly emptied, but tension remained. Miguel was escorted out, glancing briefly at his cousin. On the prosecution table, 3 parallel stacks of color-coded files, DNA, financial, witness, reflected the overhead lights. Rebecca Sloan closed her notebook, writing the day's final line. Trial opened, prosecution presented DNA, financial, witness chain, defense challenged plea deal testimony validity. All evidence accepted as valid. On the morning of May 4, 2010, the federal trial continued with direct examination of Leonard Lenny Torres, regarded as the final link connecting the entire chain of events from 1982 to the present. The courtroom was deathly quiet as Lenny took the stand, face pale, clutching the Bible tightly while being sworn in. He looked around, the lights harsh on his weathered face, voice hoarse but clear. "I'm ready to tell the truth, even if it hurts me." Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Delaney began with a simple question. "Please tell the court where you were and what you did on the night of July 15, 1982. Lenny took a deep breath, voice shaking. "I was 13, living with my parents near Edmond. Around 9 p.m., my cousin Miguel Torres came by. He was driving a red Mesa pickup, told me to help move a heavy company drum, said it was technical waste that had to be buried because it was hazardous. I believed him and went." He paused, gripping the microphone, eyes down. We drove dirt roads eastward to an open lot. He had a shovel and flashlight. When we arrived, he opened the truck bed. There was a big metal drum, dented on one side, strong oil smell. I asked what was inside, he said. Don't ask, just dig fast, and we'll go home. I dug with him. The clay was wet, every shovelful heavy. When the hole was done, he dragged the drum down. It hit so hard, I stepped back. Then he poured a can of oil over it and told me to fill it in. Delaney continued. Did you see inside the drum? Lenny shook his head. I only glimpsed something, a piece of green cloth, soaked in oil, and what looked like a human hand. I got scared and turned away. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Merritt signaled for order. Delaney asked, do you remember the exact location where you buried the drum? Lenny pulled a copy of the map he had given the FBI from his pocket and pointed out distances from County Road 5, saying, right next to the wooden fence with the Red Mesa storage area sign. We buried it, right there. I remember because the red light from the pump station shone through the trees onto the ground. Delaney displayed the map on screen. Lenny's indicated spot matched the 2008 recovery coordinates of Thomas Rayburn's remains to within 20 meters. After confirmation, she asked, did you see Miguel again after that night? Lenny lowered his head. No, he told me to forget it, never tell anyone. I stayed silent for 26 years. His voice broke. The prosecution displayed the crime scene drum photo and asked, do you recognize this as the type of drum you and Miguel buried? Lenny studied it and nodded slightly. Yes, dented on the lower left, faint RME lettering on the lid. I remember clearly. Karen Delaney walked to the evidence table and held up the sealed nylon cord. And this, did you see cord like this that night? Lenny answered, yes. He took it from the truck bed. I saw a piece exactly like that, gray, slightly oily. Prior forensic results had confirmed this nylon cord was from the same production batch as the ligature around the victim's neck bones. Delaney asked, did you hear Miguel say anything while pouring oil on the drum? Lenny swallowed, shook his head slightly. He said, don't look, just do it. This doesn't concern you. I didn't dare ask more. The courtroom was silent, except for the court reporter's keys. Delaney ended with, why did you decide to testify? Lenny replied, I don't want to take it to my grave. I was a kid who obeyed his older cousin, but now I have to speak. After the prosecution rested, Attorney Alan Price began cross-examination. You received immunity from prosecution for cooperating, correct? I didn't get immunity, I got probation, Lenny replied. Are you aware that if Miguel is convicted, you'll be considered the witness who helped the government solve the case, and that affects your own sentence execution? I just want to tell the truth. Price shifted. You said you saw a hand, but you're not sure. You were a child. Can 30-year-old memory be accurate? Lenny was silent, then said, when they found the drum, I knew I remembered correctly. The attorney kept pressing for inconsistencies, asking why Lenny never reported it all those years. He answered, because I was afraid, because he was family. When Price pressed harder, do you realize your cousin faces life in prison because of your words? Lenny looked up, eyes red. I know, but I'm not lying. The tense cross-examination lasted over an hour and ended when Judge Merritt called a recess to restore order. Reporters noted the jury sat motionless, eyes fixed on the witness. Rebecca Sloan, seated behind, followed every word, observing that every detail Lenny provided matched the forensic file: drum dented lower left, oil smell, nylon cord, fence location, even the red pump station light confirmed by 1982 satellite imagery. When testimony ended, Lenny stepped down and passed Miguel, who kept his head down and did not look up. Sloan wrote the day's final line, witness Leonard Torres, testimony matches forensic results and scene location perfectly, high authenticity, strengthens prosecution chain. On the afternoon of May 4, 2010, following Leonard Torres's testimony, the prosecution called its next expert witness, Dr. Charles Gorman, head of OSBI Forensic Biology, who had personally examined the remains and evidence in the Thomas Rayburn case. He took the stand, tall and thin, silver-rimmed glasses, calm low voice, the demeanor of someone accustomed to proving truth through science. When Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Delaney asked, "Doctor, please explain to the jury the mechanism of the victim's death," Gorman opened his file and projected images of the cervical vertebrae, describing in detail, the victim died of mechanical asphyxia due to ligature strangulation with a hard object, specifically industrial electrical cable, with a copper-nickel core. Marks on vertebrae C2 and C3 indicate sustained strong pressure for at least 20-30 seconds. When we compared the bone indentations with remaining polymer fibers, we confirmed the cable was from the same production batch as the wire recovered around the neck bones in the drum. The uniform circular indentations prove the victim was strangled while still alive, as biological tissue response was still active. Delaney continued, "Can you estimate time of death?" Gorman replied, "Based on decomposition state, bone structure and environmental data, we determined death occurred between late night July 15 and early morning July 16, 1982. That is, only hours after he was last seen in his garage." He pointed to charts showing carbon isotope results and archived Edmund weather data demonstrating consistency. Stab wounds to the right ribs indicate a struggle occurred, but were not the direct cause of death. They only contributed to blood loss. Death was due to asphyxia from strangulation. Delaney moved to post-mortem interval. "Can you determine when the body was placed in the drum?" Gorman answered. Analysis of oil residue inside the drum showed oil adhered to ribs and clothing immediately after blood had dried, meaning the body was placed in the drum within 3-5 hours of death. Additional oil was then poured to create an oxygen barrier, slowing decomposition. Carbon-14 results from fabric and soil indicate the drum was buried 12-24 hours after death. When Delaney asked, "So the entire sequence, death and disposal, occurred within the same time frame as the night of disappearance?" Gorman nodded. "Precisely. All physical data align with the night of July 15, 1982. He displayed the nighttime temperature chart and continued, "Based on clay sediment layers around the drum, combined with microbial composition, burial can be confirmed as midsummer, not coinciding with later fall rains. That means the drum was buried the same night or the next morning after Rayburn went missing." After the presentation, Delaney asked him to describe victim resistance marks. Gorman explained. "No fractures of hand or arm bones, indicating Rayburn was subdued suddenly, most likely attacked from behind. The force vector suggests the perpetrator was either taller or positioned behind the shoulder. At Rayburn's height of 5'10", the strangler needed to be of comparable or greater height, data that matches Miguel Torres's physical profile in his Red Mesa personnel file. That statement caused many in the courtroom to look toward the defendant. Miguel sat motionless, hands clasped, staring at the wooden table. Attorney Alan Price objected that the prosecution was leading the witness to prejudicial conclusion. Judge Merritt tapped the gavel and allowed continuation provided Gorman stayed within his expertise. Delaney shifted to the oil connection with the Red Mesa yard. Gorman displayed mass spectrometry graphs. This is the sample from the drum, this from the Red Mesa storage tank. The spectra are identical. The additive marker RMEL21 is unique to the June 1982 batch. Everything confirms the drum came from the exact yard where the defendant worked. Delaney's final question, "In your opinion, do all the physical data mechanism of death, time of death, oil source, cable, remain consistent with witness Leonard Torres's testimony?" Gorman answered firmly, "Completely consistent. Physical evidence and testimony match in every detail: time, location, materials, and disposal behavior." He continued evenly, "Science cannot lie. The numbers, compositions, and structures all point to the same truth. The victim died the night of July 15, 1982. In his garage, strangled with electrical cable, placed in a Red Mesa oil drum, and buried near the storage yard." The jury took constant notes. Many studied the scene photos again. When the presentation ended, Delaney thanked him, and stepped back. Price cross-examined briefly, trying to suggest time of death cannot be determined with absolute certainty. But Gorman replied calmly, in forensic science, a 24-hour margin still falls within the disappearance night, and does not alter the conclusion. After that answer, Price fell silent. Judge Merritt concluded the expert segment by noting, forensic findings fully corroborate prosecution timeline. As courtroom lights dimmed slightly, Rebecca Sloan looked at the final chart still projected. The time of death curve aligning perfectly with the night Rayburn vanished. A cold but irrefutable demonstration that closed the forensic pathologist's testimony in the nearly 3-decade-old case. On the morning of May 5, 2010, the trial moved to closing arguments, beginning with the defense. Attorney Alan Price stood, walked slowly to the center, faced the jury, voice sharp but controlled. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 days you have heard many testimonies, many scientific terms, many complicated charts. But the core principle of American law remains unchanged. No one is convicted unless guilt is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, no one saw Miguel Torres kill anyone. There is no eyewitness, no video, no confession. All the prosecution has is a chain of assumptions stitched together with 27-year-old data. He walked along the jury box, gesturing toward the defendant. Miguel Torres, an ordinary worker, no prior record, no history of violence. They say he forged documents, but no one saw it. They say he strangled an engineer, but the body was found after more than 2 decades when all direct traces were gone. They say he buried the body, but the only witness is a cousin with a criminal record who received leniency to testify. Can you accept testimony traded for freedom as truth? Price raised his voice, turning toward Judge Merritt. The government is constructing a story, but no human eye witnessed the act of killing. No direct eyewitness, that is the fatal weakness of the prosecution. He returned to his table, flipped through documents, reading line by line. Forensics say Rayburn died by strangulation, but cannot prove who did it. Oil could have come from the yard, but dozens had access to Red Mesa, not just Miguel. DNA in the garage. They say it's his, but he worked there, repaired vehicles, touched everything. That sample proves nothing about murder. Price concluded, if you have even the slightest doubt that Miguel may have only helped Rayburn disappears, as he himself once suggested, you must acquit. That is the law. The courtroom was silent, except for the clerk's pen. When Price sat, Karen Delaney rose, holding a thick file, walked to the lectern. Her voice was slow but steely. Ladies and gentlemen, it is true, no one saw Miguel Torres commit murder, but science saw it. The evidence spoke. Every piece we presented is an undeniable part of the truth. She held up the DNA report photo. This is the 1982 sample from Thomas Rayburn's garage, and this is Miguel Torres's 2008 sample. They match 100%, not 70%, not 90%, 99.997%. That sample does not say he was merely present. It says he had direct contact with the victim's blood. No one repairs a car and leaves DNA mixed with a dead man's blood. She then pointed to the projected financial chart. This is the July 13, 1982 transaction. $150,000 transferred from Red Mesa Energy to Miguel Torres's account on a forged Thomas Rayburn signature. 3 days later, Rayburn vanished. That is not coincidence. That is motive. She opened the file, reading items rapidly. Oil matching Red Mesa source, nylon cord from the same production batch, drum taken from the defendant's workplace, and an eyewitness who saw him bury it. They say the witness got leniency? Yes, because he told the truth. And every single detail of that truth, from burial location, oil smell, to the drum dent, has been scientifically verified. Delaney paused, scanning the jury box. No direct eyewitness. Every sample is an eyewitness. DNA is an eyewitness. The forged signature is an eyewitness. The watch-engraved TR is an eyewitness. And Miguel's very silence when asked about the night of July 15th is testimony. She stepped closer to the jury, voice lower but firm. The law does not require a pair of human eyes to see the crime. It requires proof so convincing that no reasonable doubt remains. The evidence here far exceeds that threshold. When Delaney finished, Garfinkel stood briefly to add, "I've worked fraud and murder cases for 30 years. They all have one thing in common. The perpetrator thinks he can bury the truth. But the truth always surfaces, like that drum did after 26 years." The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and light tapping on wood. Judge Merritt nodded and recessed until the following morning for jury deliberations. Rebecca Sloan sat in the back, looking at two equally thick files, one labeled Defense Argument, the other Forensic Correlation. In her view, only one carried the weight of truth. She wrote the final entry of the day. Defense argued lack of direct eyewitness, prosecution countered with DNA, financial records and full evidence chain. Prosecution's argument maintains complete structural integrity of the case. On the morning of May 6, 2010, the jury was led into the second-floor deliberation room at the United States District Court for the Northern District of Oklahoma to begin discussing their verdict. The 12 members, 7 men and 5 women, had sat through 5 full days of trial. Spread out before them were thick stacks of files, crime scene photographs, DNA charts, bank records, and witness statements. The foreperson opened the discussion with the central question, does the evidence prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Miguel Torres committed murder? For the first few hours, the room was tense and mostly silent. Some jurors believed the chain of DNA and financial evidence was overwhelming and pointed only to Torres. Others were more cautious, arguing that there was no eyewitness, no specific description of the act of killing, only circumstantial evidence and inference. An older woman said, "I believe he knew what happened, but I'm not convinced he was the one who strangled him." The debate dragged on. Jurors took turns re-examining the timeline charts, the barrel photos, and Lenny's testimony. Another juror remarked, "That testimony might be true, but the kid back then couldn't have known for sure there was a body in the barrel." After more than 4 hours, the first ballot came back 8 guilty and 4 not guilty on second-degree murder. At 3:10 p.m., Judge Merritt received the report from the foreperson and instructed them to continue deliberating. By 5 p.m., the second ballot was 9 guilty, 3 not guilty. The foreperson asked for a break to consider alternative outcomes, noting the group clearly could not reach unanimity. In the internal notes he wrote, "Members generally agree defendant was involved in concealment, but disagree on direct act of homicide." After a short dinner break, the jury resumed discussion of the lesser charges. One member suggested, "If we can't prove the killing itself, we can still find him responsible for hiding the body, falsifying records, and obstructing justice." The rest agreed to consider that path. A handwritten draft verdict was prepared. While the evidence supports involvement in concealment and obstruction, the jury cannot unanimously find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The final vote at 7:25 p.m. was unanimous 12-0, not guilty on second-degree murder and unanimous 12-0, guilty on obstruction of justice and federal financial fraud. The foreperson signed the verdict forms and had them time-stamped by the clerk. At approximately 7:45 p.m., the jury returned to the courtroom. The tension was so thick, everyone seemed to stop breathing. When asked, the foreperson stood and announced clearly, "As to count 1 second-degree murder, we are not unanimous. The defendant is not guilty. As to count 2, obstruction of justice, guilty. As to count 3, financial fraud, guilty." A heavy silence fell over the room. Miguel Torres bowed his head, eyes tightly shut. Delaney stared straight at the bench, maintaining her composure, while Garfinkel quickly wrote in his notebook, "Verdict split. Homicide not proven, obstruction confirmed." Judge Merritt polled the jury, thanked them, and announced the case would proceed to sentencing. As the jurors filed out, Rebecca Sloan remained seated for a moment, her hand resting on the dog-eared case file containing dozens of forensic reports, statements, maps, and a complete chain of evidence, everything needed to prove the truth, but not enough to convict for murder. She wrote only one final line in her notebook that day: jury hung on murder charge, unanimous guilty on obstruction of justice and fraud. On the morning of June 10, 2010, nearly a month after the verdict, the United States District Court for the Northern District of Oklahoma held the sentencing hearing for Miguel A. Torres. The courtroom was quiet, with only a few reporters and family members present. Judge David Merritt recited the summary. After a 5-day trial, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict on second-degree murder, but unanimously found defendant Miguel A. Torres guilty of obstruction of justice and federal financial fraud. His voice was low and deliberate, echoing through the old wood-paneled room. Miguel stood, head slightly bowed, face expressionless, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Judge Merritt looked directly at the defendant. "This court has determined you did not kill Thomas Rayburn, but you knew he was dead, and you chose to bury the truth beneath oil-stained dirt and money." From the prosecution table, Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Delaney recommended a sentence of 10 to 12 years, citing the seriousness of concealing a body, derailing an investigation, and committing federal financial fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1503 and 1343. Defense counsel Alan Price objected, emphasizing that his client had already been punished by 27 years, lived in fear and isolation, and asked the court to consider Miguel's cooperation and age. Judge Merritt paused, reviewed the nearly 2,000-page file, then spoke slowly. The court notes the defendant did not resist arrest and has no prior record, but concealing a victim's body, falsifying financial records, and remaining silent before the law for 26 years cannot be treated lightly. Justice is not measured by the length of time one waits. He tapped the gavel lightly and pronounced sentence. Defendant Miguel A. Torres is sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, no probation, eligible for reduction only after serving a minimum of 6 years. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. No one spoke. Miguel bowed his head slightly, lips moving as if to say something, but no sound came. When asked if he had any final words, he said only, "I never wanted this to happen." The judge did not respond and directed the marshals to remove him. Camera flashes went off as the door opened, capturing the image of the silver-haired man in handcuffs walking between two agents, ending a journey of nearly 3 decades of flight and silence. After Miguel was led away, the court proceeded to the matter of witness Leonard "Lenny" Torres, who had revealed the buried barrel and agreed to cooperate. Under the signed proffer agreement, the government moved to dismiss accomplice liability in the Rayburn case, but because of his prior felony auto theft convictions and recidivism, federal law required separate punishment. Judge Merritt announced, in light of full cooperation and critical testimony that solved the case, the court imposes the maximum reduction, 20 years federal imprisonment to run concurrent with existing sentences, eligible for release after 12 years. Lenny only nodded, showing no reaction. In the back row, Rebecca Sloan sat quietly and wrote, "Miguel, 8 years, Lenny, 20 years. Beside her, Garfinkel closed federal case 08HC 274 and whispered, 27 years, and still no one convicted of the murder. She did not reply, eyes fixed on the judgment sheet where not guilty, second-degree murder, stood out above guilty, obstruction of justice, financial fraud. Those dry words still carried an indescribable sense of emptiness. As she left the courtroom, June's sunlight poured into the long hallway. Rebecca paused at the window. Outside, the American flag waved gently. Inside, the Rayburn file was closed with an incomplete verdict. One man acquitted of murder, yet convicted of burying justice, along with his old friend's body, for nearly 3 decades. On September 22, 2010, 3 months after sentencing, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation officially issued an internal memorandum closing the Thomas Rayburn investigation, cold case #82047. The brief note, stamped in red, read status, solved, 2009. The line was bolded, followed by the lead investigator's name, Rebecca Sloan. After nearly 3 decades, the once-forgotten missing person case was officially changed from presumed deceased to homicide. Solved, closing one of Payne County's oldest cold cases. That morning, Rebecca was at OSBI headquarters to submit the final 500-plus page report containing the entire investigation, lab results, court transcripts, and final judgment. The archive room was silent, fluorescent lights shining on rows of old metal cabinets holding hundreds of unsolved disappearances, violent crimes, and fraud cases from the 1970s and 80s. When the archivist stamped the Rayburn folder for the last time, the dry thud of the stamp echoed like the end of years of pursuit. Rebecca opened the master report and reread the first line. Case opened July 16, 1982. Missing person. Then the last case closed September 22, 2010. Solved, subject convicted of obstruction of justice. An entire journey compressed into 2 sentences. Although the court did not confirm the act of killing, every piece of physical and financial evidence pointed to Miguel Torres as the person primarily responsible for disposing of the victim and concealing the crime. The purpose of a cold case file is no longer punishment, but establishing truth, and that truth was finally recorded. Garfinkel sent an internal email from the Tulsa office. The team has closed a case no one believed could ever be solved. The DNA, forensic evidence, and OSB persistence prove that justice may be delayed but is never lost. The final report also recommended the Rayburn case be added to OSBA training curriculum as a model cold case investigation, combining physical evidence and financial records. All physical exhibits, the barrel, nylon cord, Edmund map, oil and soil samples, were transferred to the Central Evidence Repository in Oklahoma City, sealed under new archive code, Archive 09, RME 045. The thickest appendix was Rebecca Sloan's personal investigative log, documenting every milestone from body recovery to trial verdict. Each page annotated by hand in blue ink between signatures and timestamps. When she turned in the original, she kept only a personal copy in an envelope marked "For Records Only." That afternoon, as she left headquarters, she paused in the hallway beneath a newly mounted plaque, Cold Case Division, Resolved Files. Beneath the engraving was the list of closed cases, the newest entry, #82047. Rayburn, Thomas. Solved, 2009. Rebecca stood quietly for a few seconds, watching the name reflect the window light. Outside, the Oklahoma sky was clear and blue, just like that summer morning years ago, when a man left for work and never came home. Now his file was closed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough for justice to have an ending. On September 30, 2010, exactly 1 week after cold case #82047 was marked Solved, 2009. All physical evidence and documents in the Thomas Rayburn case were transferred to the Central OSBA Evidence Vault in Oklahoma City. Rebecca Sloan was present that morning to supervise final handover. The evidence cartons were clearly labeled MR08045A metal drum, GR02, GR03, oil and rags from garage, MG0901, Edmund map, MG0902, nylon cord seized from Miguel Torres' residence, plus 18 volumes of financial records, forensic reports, statements, and crime scene photos. Each carton was sealed with red tape, bearing signatures from FBI Tulsa, OSBA, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The vault technician checked the climate control, noted 21 degrees Celsius, stable, and entered the new reference code, Archive Reference, OSBA, RME, 82047-C. Rebecca signed the final receipt, all physical evidence and documents stored permanently. A mixture of emptiness and relief washed over her as she set down the pen. Almost 30 years earlier, a man had vanished without a trace. Now the entire story was reduced to numbers, evidence tags, and storage codes. As staff wheeled the evidence carts into the vault, cold fluorescent light reflected off the concrete floor. The heavy steel door closed with a long metallic echo that reverberated down the hallway, like the final note of a nearly three-decade investigation. Rebecca lingered a few minutes before the electronic display showing the new status, case #82047, status, closed. Below it, the system automatically displayed the lifespan, opened July 16, 1982, closed September 30, 2010. In her duty log, she wrote the last entry. All evidence archived, case officially closed after 27 years. Walking out of the vault, afternoon sun glinted off the chain-link fence and vehicle plates in the parking lot. No more reports, no more calls, just one completed file, a tiny entry in OSBI's vast system, yet the end of a pursuit she and generations of investigators had followed. Rebecca paused at the gate, where the sign evidence storage facility sparkled in the sunlight, then turned away carrying a strange quiet calm. Justice, however late, had found its place among thousands of other cold files resting silently behind that steel door, and among them, one file bearing the name Thomas Rayburn, permanently marked closed, solved. The story of the 1982 disappearance of Oklahoma engineer Thomas Rayburn, closed after 27 years of investigation, is more than a criminal case file. It is a mirror reflecting a society that constantly wrestles with the line between morality, honesty, and the power of justice. Every detail, from the $150,000 fraud to the oil drum buried in the ground, shows how greed and silence can destroy generation. Miguel Torres was not convicted of murder, but he chose to bury the truth to protect himself. In a society like America today, where every action leaves a trace from financial records and DNA to digital history, this story reminds us that no wrongdoing truly disappears. It simply hasn't been found yet. The perseverance of Rebecca Sloan and the OSB team reflects the core value of the American justice system. Justice may come late, but it does not forget anyone. That lesson is especially vital today, when public trust in institutions and professional ethics is under strain. Look at Red Mesa Energy, once a symbol of progress, yet the place where crime began. It is a reminder that material success can never replace integrity. From the Rayburn story, every American today can take away one simple truth. Truth always has longer-lasting value than short-term gain. Live and work as though every action, whether a signature, a decision, or a silence, may be examined again decades later, by justice and by conscience. Thank you for following the journey to close the Thomas Rayburn case, proof that truth, even when buried, will one day be found. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring other cold cases together, where justice always knows how to return, no matter how many years of silence have passed.